I don't remember exactly where we were coming from that night. It was one of those trips where the destination feels secondary to the company. Me, my ex, and a few of our mutual friends had piled into a car sometime earlier that day. I think it might have been a concert or maybe just a day trip to some small town outside the city. It doesn't really matter. What I do remember is the ride back, the quiet hum of the tires rolling over the interstate and the sound of someone's playlist skipping through half-played songs. It was past midnight and the highway was dead. Just an endless ribbon of pavement lit by the car's headlights and the occasional green glow of exit signs that we never took. We were about 30 minutes outside town when someone mentioned they had to pee. No one really said anything, but we were all kind of in that same tired headspace, silent, drained, a little delirious. The kind of fatigue that makes a gas station restroom sound like a gift from heaven. So when we saw the silhouette of a closed-down gas station off the side of the road, we pulled in without thinking much about it. The sign was half-lit, buzzing faintly. It looked abandoned, the kind of place that probably closed at sundown if it ever even opened that day. There weren't any cars in the lot, no trucks fueling up, no semis parked along the side. Just the building, a couple of beat-up trash bins, and 2 outdoor restrooms attached to the back. We rolled around the side slowly, gravel crunching under the tires. The lights on that side of the building were out completely, so we had to rely on the car's headlights to see anything. That's when we saw him. He was standing about 10 or 15 feet from the back wall, pushing one of those industrial metal carts you usually see behind stores. The cart was halfway filled with what looked like trash or old supplies. Hard to tell. He was wearing these yellow rubber dish gloves, a dirty brownish coverall, and what looked like a full respirator with thick goggles covering his eyes. No vehicle in sight. Nothing to suggest he had just parked or worked there. I didn't even notice the car at first. What got my attention was how he reacted to seeing us. The moment our headlights swung over him, he stopped pushing the cart and turned toward us. Just froze in place. Then, without warning, he broke into a sprint, straight at the car. It took maybe half a second for my brain to react. I wasn't about to wait around and see what his deal was. I floored it. Gravel spat out from under the tires as I swerved around the lot and peeled back onto the highway. I didn't even check if the restrooms were open. We didn't say anything for a while. Everyone was quiet. I remember my hands felt wet on the steering wheel, but I wasn't sweating. It was that cold, tight kind of fear, the kind that makes your muscles feel like metal rods. After a couple miles, someone in the back asked what the hell that guy was doing, but nobody had an answer. The gas station was at least a mile away from the nearest exit in either direction. Surrounded by fields, just long, empty stretches of flat farmland, with maybe a barn or silo way off in the distance. No sidewalks, no bus stops, nothing around that would explain why someone would be there, especially dressed like that. And he had no vehicle. What sticks with me even now isn't just that he chased us, it was the way he moved. There was no hesitation. He didn't shout, didn't wave, or try to get our attention. It wasn't like he was asking for help. He just ran, dead sprint, straight at us, like he was trying to reach the door before we could react. I drove the rest of the way back to town with my eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the road. My heart was pounding. Every time a pair of headlights appeared behind us, I braced myself, half expecting to see someone in a brown coverall and yellow gloves running down the middle of the road. But there was nothing. We made it home without anything else happening. The night kind of died after that. People just got dropped off one by one. No one really wanted to talk about it. When I finally got back to my apartment, I just sat in the car for a while, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. That was when it started to sink in. That guy had no reason to be there. No one dresses like that to clean toilets. And nobody runs toward a car at full speed unless something's seriously wrong. I never found out who he was or why he was there. I tried searching news sites, police reports, even Reddit. Nothing. Just another strange incident on some forgotten stretch of road. Months later, my ex told me something that brought all that fear rushing back. She'd gone to visit her sister in Atlanta. They were close, and her sister had just moved in with her boyfriend. So they made a day of it, toured the city, got dinner, and went to a Braves game. Nothing out of the ordinary. On their way back from the stadium, they took a wrong turn and ended up in a bad part town. Not unfamiliar in a big city. Happens all the time. They realized it almost immediately. Rundown buildings, broken streetlights, sidewalks filled with trash, the works. They were trying to reroute the GPS when they saw a group of people in the middle of the street up ahead. She told me they thought it might have been a block party or something at first. But as they got closer, they realized what was happening. It wasn't a party. It was a group of 5 or 6 people, all surrounding one guy on the ground. They were kicking him, stomping, hitting him with what looked like bats or pipes. The street was lit just enough that you could make out the way his body jerked with each hit. My ex said they stopped the car about 20 feet away and just froze. Locked the doors. Sat there, staring, hoping the group wouldn't notice them. But the strange part, the part that chilled me, was that they did notice. They looked up, saw the car, and then just kept going, as if it didn't matter, as if the presence of a witness wasn't even worth acknowledging. Eventually, the group walked off, just scattered, casually like they'd finished some chore. The guy on the ground wasn't moving. My ex's sister drove around him carefully, and they sped out of there. They didn't call anyone, didn't stop to check. They just left. When my ex got back to her hotel, she sent me a picture she'd taken from the car. You couldn't see much, just the silhouettes of the people standing around the body, all blurry under the weak light. But you could tell what was happening, and you could feel how surreal it was. The stillness of the car, the locked doors, the fact that no one intervened. It reminded me of that night at the gas station. That same feeling, that you just brushed against something horrible and real and close. Over the years, I've tried to rationalize both things. Maybe the guy at the gas station was mentally ill or a vagrant with nowhere to go, just scavenging an old card. Maybe the people in Atlanta were gang members or drug dealers, and that kind of violence was just part of that world. Maybe my ex exaggerated what she saw, but the fear we felt, me at the station, her in the car, that was real. That doesn't fade. What sticks with me isn't just the danger. It's the randomness. The idea that you can be driving home with friends 1 minute and seconds later be fleeing from someone whose face you'll never see clearly. Or sitting quietly in a car while someone gets beaten to death a few feet away and no one even reacts. Life doesn't always offer closure. There's no detective who shows up later to explain things. No newspaper article to tie it all together. Just unanswered questions and the knowledge that something was wrong and you escaped it, barely. But I don't forget that man's sprint. The way he charged our car like he had nothing to lose. Or the picture my ex sent, those silhouettes under the streetlight, frozen in a moment of violence. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, especially in quiet, empty places, I still feel it. That tightening in the chest. That instinct to scan the sides of the road. I don't stop at gas stations anymore if they're closed. I don't pull off at exits that feel too quiet. Because some nights, out there where the road stretches on and everything feels just a little too still, you remember what it felt like to see someone run at you without a word. And you wonder what would have happened if you hadn't hit the gas. Last month, something happened to me that I can't explain, even though I've gone over in my head 100 times since. I keep trying to find a rational answer for it, because that's just how I've always been. I've never believed in ghosts or the paranormal. I don't buy into conspiracy theories or supernatural stuff. I live in a regular apartment in a regular neighborhood, and I work a regular office job. My days are usually quiet and predictable. That's why what happened shook me so badly. Because it didn't fit into the pattern of my life. It started with a nightmare. I don't get nightmares often, maybe once every few years. And even when I do, they're usually vague and fade away by the time I wake up. But this one was different. It was vivid and brutal, and I remember every detail like it really happened. In the dream, I was walking down a street that looked familiar, maybe a street I'd walked on before in real life, though I can't remember exactly where. The air was heavy and gray. The buildings around me seemed dull and lifeless, and everything was quiet. Too quiet. I passed a man standing near the curb. I couldn't make out his face. He looked like a shadow wearing clothes. He mumbled something as I passed. I didn't hear him clearly, so I turned around and stepped closer, thinking he might have asked for directions or something. As soon as I was within arm's reach, he stuck me with a needle. Just jabbed it straight into my neck. I didn't even have time to react before everything went black. My knees gave out, and I collapsed right there in the dream. It felt disturbingly real. I could feel the cold sting of a needle, the sensation of falling, the helplessness. Then I woke up, or at least I thought I did, but I was still dreaming. I found myself in a dark underground room. It looked like a dungeon. Wet stone walls, rusted chains, no light except for a sickly red glow that seemed to come from the cracks in the floor. I was lying on a kind of metal rack, my arms and legs tied down with thick, rough chains. Around me were these things, grotesque creatures that looked like demons. I know how that sounds, but in the dream, it didn't feel cartoonish or fake. Their skin was torn and burned, their eyes were hollow pits, and their voices were the worst part. Guttural, cruel, echoing laughter as they whispered, "There is no escape." Over and over, "There is no escape." They repeated it like a chant. Then they started flaying my skin. I could feel it, feel the pain, the tearing like I was being peeled alive. I screamed. I begged. I pulled against the chains with everything I had, but nothing gave. Just more laughter, just more pain. And then I heard my doorbell. Not in the dream, in real life. My eyes snapped open, and I was in bed in my apartment. The dream was gone, but the sound of the doorbell was real, cutting through the silence of the early morning. It was still dark outside. I checked my phone. 5:03 a.m. Sunday. I sat up in bed, heart still racing from the nightmare. My forehead was slick with sweat, my chest tight. The doorbell rang again. Ding dong. Clear as day. Not some random noise. Not something I could dismiss as part of the dream. I live alone. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at 5 in the morning. I froze. For a moment, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I was still dreaming, but I wasn't. The room was cold. The fan in the corner of my room was humming. The software of my refrigerator floated up from the kitchen downstairs. Everything was real. I got out of bed and grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand. I don't know why I took it. I guess it just made me feel a little safer. My apartment has 2 floors, and the front door is downstairs. I crept out into the hallway, heart thudding, and walked slowly down the stairs, avoiding the creaky spots in the wood. When I got to the bottom, I stopped in the front hallway. The porch light was on, casting a pale glow through the glass panels of the front door. I could see the outline of the street and a bit of the sidewalk. It was raining lightly, thin streaks of water slipping down the glass. Cold and miserable outside. I hesitated for a few seconds before stepping closer to the door. I looked through the window. No one was there. The street was completely empty. The houses across the way had their lights off. No movement, no cars, nothing, just dark and rain. I stayed by the door for a while, listening. The silence was thick. My porch was too small for someone to hide on, and the street too open for someone to vanish that quickly. The doorbell had rung only seconds before I got downstairs. I opened the door just a crack and looked outside. Still no one. No footprints, no signs that anyone had even been there. My porch was a thin concrete slab. Anyone who stepped on it would have made noise or left a trail in the light mist. I closed the door and locked it. I stood there for a minute, not sure what to do next. Was it a prank? A malfunction? The bell rang twice, and then nothing. I went back upstairs, more confused and scared. Maybe some random kid screwing around. But at 5 a.m., in the rain? It didn't sit right with me, but I didn't have anything else to go on. I closed my bedroom door and climbed back into bed. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in circles. The nightmare kept replaying in my head, especially the voices. There's no escape, and then the doorbell ringing again, right at that moment. It felt too perfect, too connected, even though I knew that was probably just my brain trying to make patterns. Just as I was starting to calm down, I heard it again. This time it rang 3 times back to back. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Rapid, desperate. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering. This time I didn't bother being quiet. I rushed downstairs, practically leaping the last few steps. I threw the front door open. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just cold air and rain and silence. My fingers were trembling as I shut the door again. This wasn't normal. Doorbells don't ring on their own. And whoever or whatever was doing this, they had to be fast. Too fast. There wasn't enough time between the bell ringing and me getting down the stairs for someone to run off and disappear. I didn't know what else to do, so I turned off the doorbell ringer altogether. I pulled the faceplate off and disconnected the wire. I wasn't about to let it ring again. The sound had started to feel wrong. Not just startling, but wrong. Like it didn't belong. I sat in the living room for a while after that. I turned on the TV, hoping the noise would help distract me, but I couldn't focus on anything. Every little creak of the building made me flinch. I ended up staying awake until the sun came up. Around 7 a.m., I made coffee and tried to convince myself that I overreacted. Maybe the doorbell had a short. Maybe it was some kid pulling a prank. I didn't believe it, but I told myself those things anyway. That afternoon, I took the doorbell unit apart. The wiring seemed fine. Nothing was shorted. Nothing was exposed. I even tested it with a multimeter I borrowed from a neighbor. Nothing abnormal. I put it back together, reconnected the wire, and waited. It didn't ring again. Not that day or the next. But that week, strange things kept happening. Small things. My living room light flicked on by itself in the middle of the night. My kitchen cabinet doors would be open in the morning when I was sure I'd close them. Once, I found my front door unlocked when I came home from work, and I never leave it unlocked. I always double check it. Every time, I started to feel like I was being watched. Not in a paranoid, panicked way. Just this low, uncomfortable awareness that I wasn't alone. I started keeping my flashlight on my nightstand. I double-checked all my windows and doors every night before bed. I slept with the lights on a few times. But nothing else happened. The doorbell never rang again. No more dreams. No more footsteps. No shadows. Just silence. Eventually, the feeling faded. After a week or two, life went back to normal. Or close to it. I still don't sleep as easily as I used to. I still check my locks twice. And I haven't had a single nightmare since. But the memory of that morning sticks with me. The worst part isn't the dream. It's not the doorbell or the rain or the empty porch. It's that I still don't know what happened. I've run through every possibility. Electrical glitch, prank, sleep paralysis, but none of them fit. And the way it all lined up, the nightmare, the doorbell ringing exactly as the dream ended, the timing, the empty street, it was too perfect. I don't think it was a ghost or anything like that. I still don't believe in that stuff. But I do think there are things we don't fully understand. Little cracks in the wall of normal life. Sometimes something slips through. Maybe just once. Maybe for just a moment. Whatever it was, it left me alone. And for now, that's enough. But I still keep the doorbell disconnected. Just in case. We had spent the entire day at Carowinds, from the minute the gates opened until the last ride slowed to a stop and the final group of families and kids trickled out under the orange-pink sky. My body ached from walking around all day. My legs felt like they had weights tied to them, and my face felt tight from all the sun. Every one of us was sunburned, sweaty, and sore. We had squeezed every ounce of the park into one long, hot, loud summer day. I wasn't even supposed to be driving. I didn't have a license. I was 16, and it wasn't even my car. The friend who had driven us there in the morning had said he couldn't do it on the way back. He was more exhausted than any of us, and I believed him. He had been nodding off, standing in line for Fury 325. It wasn't safe to let him drive. Still, the idea of me, 16, unlicensed, driving on the highway at night was ridiculous. But it was the only option. Nobody else could. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. I remember the heaviness of that moment. Pulling out of the Carowinds lot, darkness falling over the road, the radio low and fuzzy, my heart thudding like I just dropped on a coaster. It was a Monday night, well after 1 a.m. Summer break meant we didn't care how late it got, but the roads were almost completely empty. After the first 10 or 20 minutes, I noticed we hadn't seen another car in a long time. There weren't any lights ahead. Nothing behind us. Just black highway stretching forever. I tried to stay exactly at the speed limit. Not a single mile over. The last thing I wanted was to get pulled over. I didn't know what would happen if a cop saw a 16-year-old behind the wheel with no license and a car full of equally exhausted teenagers. But I knew it wouldn't be good. The hum of the tires and the air blowing through the cracked windows were the only sounds. The AC barely worked, and it felt like the sticky heat of the day was still stuck in the seats. Everyone else had started to drift off. heads tilted toward windows or back against the seat cushions. It was the kind of quiet that's not peaceful, just drained. Then I saw headlights. They came up behind us, distant at first. I figured, finally, someone else on the road. But as they got closer, something about it felt weird. The car didn't ease up gently or keep its distance. It came up fast, really fast, and then stuck close to my bumper. Like too close. I glanced in the mirror and could barely see the grille of the vehicle behind us. Just two blinding headlights in my rear view. I tensed up, both hands clamped on the wheel. My pulse jumped. It had to be a cop. That was my first thought. I had heard they did that sometimes, followed people too closely just to see if they get nervous and make a mistake. My mind ran wild. If I braked, even a little, if I swerved, if I sped up, I'd give them a reason. Maybe they already knew I was too young. I sat a little lower in my seat. I woke the others up. I didn't say anything, just nudged a leg or an arm until they stirred. They looked around, still half asleep, then noticed the van behind us. Because it was a van. One of those older ones, boxy, faded with mismatched headlights. A sliding door on the side. I couldn't make out the plates. The windows looked black, not tinted like a new car, just dark. The van followed like that for maybe a mile, 2 miles, just sticking to my bumper. I could barely focus on the road. I felt like I was driving on glass. Then, without warning, it shifted lanes. It pulled into the left lane and passed. It was fast and smooth. No hesitation. I kept my eyes forward, not wanting to look at the driver. I caught a blur of the side panel. Nothing else. No faces, no motion. Just the shape of the van as it surged ahead. We all kind of exhaled at the same time. Like the pressure finally lifted. I remember rubbing my palms on my shorts. They were damp. Then I saw the taillights. I didn't know at first why they lit up so suddenly, but I realized the van was slowing. The lights got smaller as it moved toward the shoulder. Not fully off the road, just barely over the line. Maybe a quarter mile ahead. I held steady, still going the speed limit, not sure what to do. The van was stopped, and we had to pass it. It was like it wanted us to. As we got closer, my mouth went dry. There were no hazards blinking. No door opened. No one stepped out. The van just sat there. As we passed, I tried not to look, but my eyes flicked over. Still no movement. Nothing. Then in the mirror, we saw it pull back onto the road. This time, it didn't speed up to ride my bumper. It kept a distance. Not too far, not close. Like it wanted us to know it was there, but didn't want to push. It was watching. That's how it felt. Like we were being watched. I didn't know what to do. The next few minutes felt endless. Every time the road curved, I checked to see if the van was still there. It was always there. Not a car passed us. Not one came the other direction. And then someone said they had to pee. Actually, we all kind of did. It had been hours since we left Carowinds. We hadn't stopped once. The idea of stopping anywhere while that van was behind us was a nightmare. But there wasn't much choice. If someone had an accident in the car, that'd be a whole new mess. Then, finally we saw it, a rest stop sign. Just a little blue one with the usual icons. Bathrooms, vending machines, parking. I took the exit. So did the van. It was past 2 a.m. by then. The rest stop was mostly dark, but there were a few overhead lights near the building. A couple of cars sat scattered through the lot. A pickup truck, a small sedan, one RV with its inside lights on. I pulled into a space near the bathroom building. The van pulled in too, a few rows back. Not close, not far, still watching. None of us got out. We sat in silence. The only noise was the click of the engine cooling. I watched the side door of the van. Nothing moved. No one got out. I think we waited 10 minutes. Maybe more. One of us said we should go in pairs. 2 stay, 2 go. Then switch. At least someone would always be watching. The van still didn't move. We did it quick. In and out. The bathroom smelled like bleach and tired air. I remember the vending machine blinking red, out of order. There was a soda can crushed under the bench near the entrance. When we got back to the car, the van was still sitting there. Headlights off. No movement. We waited longer. Not sure how long. It felt like time wasn't moving. I kept checking the mirror, then the side window, then the rear view again. Then a car pulled in. A little gray car. A man in a polo shirt stepped out, stretched his arms, and walked into the bathroom. He didn't notice us or the van. just went about his business. When he came back out and pulled away, I started the car. We followed him out. I didn't want to get stuck alone on the road again, but at least with another car in front, it felt like a buffer. The van didn't move. It didn't follow. I drove slow for the next few miles, expecting to see headlights shoot up behind us. But nothing. It stayed back there. Maybe it left. Maybe it hadn't been following us at all. Maybe it had. We didn't say much the rest of the drive. The silence felt heavy. Everyone was wide awake, but no one wanted to talk about what had just happened. Like naming it would make it real. When we finally got off the highway and back into familiar roads, I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in hours. We were almost home. The neighborhoods started to look familiar. Streetlights, mailboxes, trash bins on the curb. I parked in front of my friend's house. We all sat there for a moment. Then we filed out, stretched, and went inside. I remember my knees almost buckling from the release of tension. No one said much before we crashed. I didn't even bother brushing my teeth. Just collapsed on the couch and closed my eyes. The next morning, in the daylight, it all felt distant. Like a weird, slow nightmare. We never really brought it up again. No one wanted to. Maybe it was nothing. Just a tired driver on a late night. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were stopping for the same reason we were. But maybe not. I still think about that van sometimes. The way it stuck close, then distant, then close again. The way it never turned off its engine. The way it just sat there, waiting. And I think about how lucky we were. Because not everyone gets home. I used to stay in my grandma's house a lot as a kid. It was a modest brick home on a quiet street, not far from where my parents lived. I remember the smell of her house vividly. Fresh laundry, old wood, a trace of lavender from the sachets she stuffed into drawers. There was a constant hum from the fridge in the kitchen and the creak of the hallway floorboard right outside the bathroom. Her house was never what you'd call creepy, at least not at first. It felt warm, lived in, slow and steady like the rhythm of her days. That changed when my grandpa died. I was 7 years old when he passed away. One day he was there, grumbling about the news and watering the backyard roses, and the next he just wasn't. He had a heart attack in the garage while looking for an old picture frame. I didn't understand death at the time, not fully, but something about his sudden absence left a dent in the house. A quiet spread over everything, like a blanket laid too tight across the chest. After that, things at Grandma's changed in small ways. She stopped baking as much. The house felt darker, even during the day, like it swallowed light instead of letting it shine. I kept staying over, though. My parents worked odd hours, and I was too young to be left alone. My younger brother came too, and we shared the back bedroom with twin beds on opposite walls. I always took the bed against the wall, near the window, because it felt safer having something solid behind me. He slept across the room, snoring lightly, always dead to the world the second his head hit the pillow. Even though I kept going back, I always felt uneasy there. It wasn't anything I could name. There weren't shadows moving or creaking doors or anything obvious like that. It was just this growing, nagging sense that something bad was waiting to happen. Like the house had changed, like it had started listening. I tried to tell myself it was grief or just imagination, but that didn't stop the feeling. Back at home, I was a terrible sleeper. Every night, I woke up. Sometimes it was just a trip to the bathroom. Sometimes I'd walk quietly into my parents' room and stand by their bed until one of them noticed. If they told me to go back to bed, I'd wander to the top of the stairs and just stand there in the dark. I don't know what I was waiting for. I used to stare into that black nothing, heart racing, half hoping and half dreading that something would move. I think I expected to see someone standing there at the bottom of the steps. I never did, but that fear never really left me. So staying at Grandma's was a mix of comfort and anxiety. She was always so calm, so gentle, always humming and folding laundry, but at night, that house felt different. My brother slept like a rock, but I never did. The back bedroom had a long wooden dresser against one wall with a mirror above it, and a shelf that ran around the top of the room where Grandma kept some old crafts and dolls. The two dolls that stood out the most were Raggedy and Raggedy Andy. They weren't new or polished. They were worn, faded a bit, and had those stitched smiles and black button eyes. Something about them always made my stomach twist. Not because they looked evil or anything. It was just that they were always there, always facing the beds like silent witnesses to everything that happened in that room. I never told my grandma. They scared me. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. She loved those dolls. Said she made them years ago, though I don't know if that was true. They were part of the room, part of the house, as solid and permanent as the wallpaper and the old radiator under the window. One night, about a year after Grandpa died, I woke up again. It must have been 2 or 3 in the morning. The room was completely dark except for the faint glow of a street lamp outside, bleeding through the thin curtains. I remember hearing the tick of the wall clock and the hum of the fridge all the way from the kitchen. I laid there for a moment, trying to fall back asleep, but the need to go to the bathroom got stronger. I sat up slowly, trying not to wake my brother. The old mattress springs creaked beneath me as I swung my legs over the side. The carpet was cold under my feet. I walked to the door in that half-sleep haze, barely awake, just focused on making it to Grandma's room so she could walk me down the hall. I didn't like going to the bathroom alone at night. The hallway seemed too long, too narrow, the shadows too heavy. I got to the doorway and paused, something nagging at me to turn around. I don't know why I did. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was habit, but I turned back toward the room, and I swear to this day, I saw Raggedy Ann's arms slowly waving at me. Her head was tilted just slightly to the side, and her right arm was raised, moving back and forth in the way a child might wave goodbye. It wasn't fast. It wasn't frantic. It was slow, deliberate. I froze. Everything in my body locked up, like I'd been hit with a jolt of electricity. I stood there in the doorway, staring at her, my breath caught in my throat. I remember my heart thudding so hard it hurt. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My brother didn't move. He was still asleep, completely oblivious. I didn't wait. I bolted. I ran down the hall barefoot, my footsteps thudding too loud on the wood floor. I turned into Grandma's room and dove into the bed without a word. She stirred slightly, but didn't get up. I think I told myself that if I just got under the covers, if I didn't look back, it wouldn't follow. I laid there curled into myself, my face buried in the pillow, trembling. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Grandma never got up to check. Maybe she thought I was having a bad dream. She was logical like that. No nonsense. If something didn't make sense, it didn't deserve attention. I didn't argue. I didn't bring it up in the morning. I don't even remember what I said. Probably nothing. It's been 14 years since that night. I'm 22 now, and I still remember it clearly. Every visit to her house since then, I made a point to avoid looking at that shelf. But it's still there. The dolls are still there. Same spot. Same shelf. Same faded faces. Raggedy and never moved again. Not once. Everyone in my family thinks it was a dream. They say I was an anxious child, that I imagined it, that it was a trick of the light or my brain half asleep. I've heard it all, and part of me wants to believe that. It will make things easier. It will make sense. But I know what I saw. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake. I remember the cold on my feet, the feel of the doorknob, the sound of the house alive in the silence. I remember the angle of her head, the slow wave, the darkness clinging to the corners of the room. It haunts me, not because I think the doll was alive or cursed or anything ridiculous like that, but because it doesn't make sense, because I can't explain it, and that's what scares me most. Maybe it was a trick of my mind. Maybe grief and anxiety and fear layered on top of each other until they cracked through in that moment. Maybe, but there's a difference between uncertainty and delusion. I've had dreams before. I've had night terrors and sleep paralysis. This wasn't that. This was real. It happened. And even though I'll probably never understand why or how, I've accepted that. The mind is a strange thing. Fear even more so. It doesn't need a reason. It just needs a crack to slip through. These days, when I visit Grandma, I still sleep in that same room. She never changed it. My brother doesn't come anymore, but I still take the bed by the wall. I don't stand in the doorway anymore. I don't look at the shelf. I draw the curtains tight, and I face the window. I try to ignore the dolls, the memories, the shadows. But every time I turn out the lights, I feel that same stillness settle over me. That same pressure in my chest. That same sense of something waiting. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear the faint rustle of fabric from across the room. I don't check. I never check. But I know what I saw, and that's enough. I didn't really believe anything was wrong at first. Not really. I mean, everyone goes through tough times. People lose jobs, run into money trouble, end up having to crash with family, or stay somewhere temporary. That's just life. And that's what I thought was happening with my cousin Jay and his wife A. They were both grounded, reasonable people, not the type to make a big deal out of nothing. Jay was a heavy engine mechanic, a big, strong guy who worked hard and didn't scare easy. O was quiet but smart, a nurse with a sharp mind. They didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. Neither did I. So when Jay told me about what happened to them in that house, I didn't know what to think. I tried to reason through it, piece it together like a puzzle. I wanted it to make sense. But even now, years later, some parts still don't. It started when Jay and A hit a rough patch. Jay had been laid off, and A had some health issues that made it hard to work full-time. They needed a place to stay for a while, just to get back on their feet. A's uncles were in the house flipping business. They had picked up this old place in an aging suburb of Toronto, near where the city starts blending into the sprawl. The house wasn't much. 2 floors, basement, old yellow siding, cracked concrete walkway out front, small overgrown yard. But it had an extra bedroom, a functioning heater, and working plumbing. It was a roof over their heads, and they were grateful for it. The uncles had plans to fix it up and sell it. In the meantime, Jay and A moved into the ground floor. It wasn't big, but it was enough. They had 2 cats, both rescues. They settled in pretty quickly, and things were quiet for a few months. Jay told me it was actually kind of nice at first. The house had a big old tree in the front yard, and the area was peaceful. They got along well with A's uncles, who were usually in and out during the day working on the place. About 4 months in, the uncles decided to take in 2 more cats they found behind another property. Apparently someone had dumped them there. Jay wasn't thrilled, but A loved animals and figured they could handle it. That brought the total to 4 cats. It started small, little things. They'd hear sounds at night, small bangs or creaks. Stuff went missing, mostly jewelry or small kitchen items. A few spoons disappeared. One of A's bracelets vanished, then turned up in the bathroom sink. Another time, one of Jay's multi-tools showed up on the back porch, even though he swore he hadn't used it in days. But Jay was forgetful sometimes. He worked with his hands, moved tools around all the time, often while talking or distracted. They chalked it up to that. Nothing to be worried about. Then the cats started acting weird. Not the new ones, all 4 of them. They'd stare at the basement door like they were waiting for something. Sometimes they'd gather there in a loose half circle and just sit, watching. At first it was just odd, but then they started hissing. Not playing around, not mock fighting. Real, full-on hissing, like they were ready to fight something. It escalated quickly. One night, all 4 cats started yowling at the same time. Jay and they woke up thinking something was wrong. They ran out to see what was going on and found the cats at the basement door, tails fluffed, ears back, making a racket. But when Jay got close, the cats scattered like someone had thrown something at them. They bolted in all directions and refused to come near the door again that night. It became a pattern. Late at night, usually after midnight, the cats would go to the basement door and start acting up. They'd hiss, yowl, sometimes even scratch at the floorboards. It didn't happen every night, but often enough to be unsettling. Jay thought maybe there were rats down there. The house was old, after all, so they called in an exterminator. The guy came during the day, did a sweep of the basement, laid out traps and poison. Said there were definitely signs of rodents. He didn't say much else, but as he was leaving, he looked at the basement door and told Jay and the uncles to make sure the cats didn't get down there. Jay agreed and shut the door behind him. It wasn't until later that day that they all realized something strange. The cats had never actually gone into the basement. Not once. The door was sometimes left open, sometimes even overnight, but none of the cats ever crossed the threshold. Not even by accident. They'd walk near it, stare at it, hiss at it, but never step inside. Jay didn't like that. Neither did A. It was subtle, but it got under their skin. Animals are weird sometimes, Sure, but cats are curious by nature. If the door was open, they should have wandered down. At least once. But they never did. It all came to a head about 6 months in. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in the kitchen washing dishes. Jay was upstairs with the uncles, helping install new shelving in one of the bedrooms. I said she heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, fast. Then a loud, sudden burst of movement, like someone had broken into a run. The sound was coming from upstairs, moving fast, pounding down the hallway, and slamming full speed down the stairs. Then the basement door slammed shut, so hard it rattled the frame. The noise was so loud that I jumped and dropped the dish she was holding. It shattered in the sink. She thought Jay was goofing around or had slipped. She called out for him, more annoyed than anything. About 20 seconds later, Jay walked calmly down the stairs and into the kitchen. He looked concerned, asked if she was okay, said they'd heard a loud crash from upstairs and thought she might have fallen. I looked at him, pale as a sheet. She told him someone had just run down the stairs and slammed the basement door. But he'd been upstairs the whole time. They searched the house from top to bottom. The uncles helped. They opened every closet, checked every room, even the attic crawl space. Then they opened the basement door. Jay said his skin went cold when he touched the doorknob. But they went down anyway, slowly. The air was musty damp. The light flickered once when they turned it on. But there was nothing down there. No sign of anyone. Jay, and they didn't sleep that night. They stayed up watching TV, all 4 cats curled up in their laps or nearby, all facing the basement door. They moved out less than 2 weeks later. The uncles stuck it out a little longer, but not by much. They had other projects to finish, but they barely slept in the house after that. They said it never felt right. They kept finding tools moved around, lights turned on, and once a hammer left in the middle of the floor when they came back after locking up the night before. They finished the renovations quickly and sold the place to a development company. Now, there's a Tim Hortons, a Wendy's, and a Subway sitting on that spot. Just another corner of the city, paved over and forgotten. Years later, it was working a new job and happened to tell one of her coworkers the story. The girl she told froze halfway through, asked for the address. When they told her, the girl went quiet, then said she knew that house. She'd grown up in that suburb. Said kids used to dare each other to sneak a peek through the basement window. That was the house where the old lady had lived, the one who kept to herself. She'd lived alone for decades with her cats. One day, someone noticed mail piling up, and when the police went to check, they found her dead in the basement. She'd taken her own life. The cats had been locked in with her, and, left with no food, had turned to her body. It was all in the papers back then, at least locally. A horrible, sad story that faded with time. But the neighborhood kids remembered. They used to run up to the house, knock on the walls, dare each other to press their faces against the dirty basement glass. Jay never told me what he saw that day. Not exactly. Just said he thought he heard footsteps, and something in his gut made him run to the basement door. But when he saw it slam without anyone there, he said he felt something break loose inside him. Like his mind tried to tell him he imagined it, but his body knew it was real. He doesn't talk about it now. Won't even drive through that part of the city. Says there's nothing for him there. I don't know what to think. I trust Jay. He's not the kind of guy who gets rattled. But he looked me in the eyes and told me that for the first time in his life, he felt afraid in a way he couldn't explain. Not of anything supernatural, just of not understanding what was happening, of not being in control. And maybe that's all it was. A bad coincidence. Rodents in the basement. Old house noises. Traumatized cats reacting to something we couldn't see. But I still think about those cats refusing to step into that basement. I think about the door slamming without a sound on the stairs. And I think about that poor old woman, alone with her animals in the dark, no one noticing she was gone. Sometimes the past lingers, not as ghosts or spirits, but as weight, a pressure in the air, something that fills up a space and refuses to leave. And sometimes the living can feel it, even if they don't know what it is. I've always liked being alone. Not lonely, just alone. There's a difference. Being around people for too long makes my thoughts feel loud. My skin feels tighter, like it's stretched too thin. I've always needed places where I could breathe. Growing up, the closest place like that was the graveyard about 3 blocks from my house. It sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, past an old iron gate that looked like it hadn't been repainted in a few decades. The sign out front had half its letters missing, and the entrance was flanked by 2 tall oak trees that stayed mostly bare no matter the season. It wasn't a big cemetery, maybe 20 rows of headstones, some of them toppled or tilted, and a few family crypts in the back corner that looked more like miniature sheds than anything grand. When I was younger, I went there during the day just to walk and think. But as I got older, I started going at night. There was a strange calm to it after dark. No cars, no barking dogs, no voices. The silence felt clean, like it had been scrubbed down. You could hear your own breath in your ears. That kind of silence doesn't exist in most places. I started going more often around the time I was 20. I had just dropped out of community college, and my job at the grocery store had cut my hours. I didn't have much to do, and even less motivation. I was going through that part of life where you feel like nothing matters, but everything weighs too much. My friends kept telling me to get out more, join something, do something. Instead, I just went to the graveyard. I'd sit on this low bench near a pair of tall marble headstones that faced each other like they were frozen in conversation. I didn't know who was buried there. The names had worn off. One night, I decided to bring a little digital recorder with me. It was something I'd picked up from a pawn shop for cheap, thinking I might use it for music. Instead, I ended up using it to try and record spirits. I've been watching videos online of people doing EVP sessions, just sitting in dark places, asking questions, then listening back to hear whispers or faint replies. It sounded ridiculous, but I figured it couldn't hurt. Plus, it gave me something to do. That first night, I didn't get anything. Just static, wind, a raccoon shuffling past me. I tried again a few nights later. Then again, still nothing. I told a few of my friends about what I was doing, just the ones I knew wouldn't laugh me off. A couple of them warned me not to mess with that kind of thing. Said I was looking for trouble, even if I didn't believe in it. I shrugged it off. I didn't really believe in ghosts. I just liked the idea of trying. It was about 2 months into these nighttime visits when I decided to try something different. I was bored mostly, tired of asking the same questions and getting nothing back. That night, I went out later than usual, around 2:45 in the morning. I remember because I glanced at the clock on my microwave as I slipped out the back door. It was a Tuesday, I think. Cold but dry. One of those nights where the sky is clear, but everything feels damp anyway. I walked the same route I always did. Past the broken fence, through the iron gate, around the wide oak in the middle. I sat on my usual bench for a bit, then wandered through the headstones like I always did. I liked to read the names, the dates. I imagined what kind of people they were, what their lives were like. Eventually, I made my way to the center of the cemetery. That's where I decided to try provoking something. Looking back, I know how dumb that sounds. But at the time, I was frustrated. I figured if there was something there and it hadn't responded to politeness, maybe it would react to anger. So I stood there in the cold, holding my recorder, and I just started talking. Not yelling, but sharp enough. I called whatever might be there a coward. Said it must be weak or trapped, useless or fake. I said worse things too. I kept going for a while, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And then I heard the laughter. It started off low, just a few quiet chuckles. Then it got louder. It wasn't a full-on maniacal laugh, not like in movies, but it was twisted, controlled, deep. The kind of laughter someone makes when they think something really funny is about to happen, and they're the only one in on the joke. It was coming from maybe 10 feet ahead of me and just off to the left. I stopped moving. My heart felt like it flipped in my chest, and for a second, I thought maybe it was just someone else out there. A prankster or some late-night drunk. But I didn't hear any footsteps, no crunching of leaves or twigs. Just the laughter. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped like someone pressed pause. I didn't try to be brave. I didn't call out. I just turned and left. Not sprinting, not yet. Just walking fast, trying not to trip over the uneven ground. I passed the oak tree, hit the fence line, and kept going. When my house came into view, I slowed down, thinking maybe it was over. The graveyard was behind me now. I was out of it. I was safe. And then the laughter came back, right behind me. I didn't stop to check how close it was. I just ran. Full sprint, lungs burning, eyes stinging. I slammed through my back door and locked it behind me. I didn't even turn off the porch light. I went straight to my room, shut the door, and climbed under the covers like a child. My chest was still heaving when I finally fell asleep. The next morning, my friend said I looked like hell. I hadn't told them what happened, but one of them said, "You pissed something off, didn't you?" It was like they already knew. That stayed with me. For a few nights after that, I didn't go back. I didn't even walk past the cemetery during the day. I tried to tell myself it was just someone messing with me. But there was no logical reason anyone would have been in that graveyard at that hour without a flashlight or a phone. And even if it was someone, how the hell did they get so close to me without making a sound? A week later, I took my dog out for a walk. He's a big shepherd mix, loud and alert. We were heading up the street when I heard giggling coming from a hill about 50 feet off the sidewalk. The hill was empty. No trees, no people, just giggling. My dog stopped, ears up, tail stiff. I yanked his leash and went the other way. That's when I started to think whatever had been in the cemetery didn't stay there. After that, things got strange. Not dramatic, just off. Like I'd wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, soaked in sweat. Or I'd hear tapping on my bedroom window, even though I lived on the second floor. Sometimes I'd get home and find the front door unlocked. Lights I know I turned off would be on again. Once I found my recorder on the floor, even though I'd left it in a drawer under a pile of clothes. I never heard the laughter in my house, but I felt it, like something unseen was always just a few steps behind me. I started leaving the TV on at night, just for the noise. My sleep got worse. I stopped going out. My job let me go after I missed 3 shifts in a row. I didn't even care. Eventually, I moved. I went across the country to stay with an aunt while I got back on my feet. It helped for a while. Different town, different air. But even there, sometimes I'd hear it. That same deep, careful giggle. Always far off, never close, but never gone either. It was like it had followed me, but stayed just out of reach. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. But over time, I tried to explain to a few people what I'd experienced. Most of them smiled politely or nodded. A couple suggested therapy. I started to believe maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I'd had some kind of breakdown and the mind filled in the rest. That was easier to believe than the alternative. Years passed. I moved again, got a better job, started sleeping normally. I even stopped thinking about that night. For a while. But then I came back. Not to the same house. Just the same state. A cousin had died, and I came for the funeral. I wasn't even thinking about the cemetery when I got in. But the second night back, I had a dream. I was standing in the middle of the graveyard again. Same bench, same trees, same broken headstones. I could feel the cold again, the stillness. And then, just before I woke up, I heard it, the laughter. Low, rich, amused. And suddenly, I wasn't just dreaming. I was awake and it was still going. It stopped after about 10 seconds. I sat up in bed, soaked in sweat. The room was quiet again. I got up, locked the windows, turned on every light. I didn't sleep again that night. I left the next day. I haven't heard the laughter since then. I haven't been back to that town. I changed my number, deleted old emails, cut ties with some of the people who used to go with me to the cemetery. Not out of anger, just necessity. It's like that part of my life needs to stay sealed off. I don't go to graveyards anymore. Not during the day. Not at night. I don't record things. I don't ask questions into the dark. I don't try to make contact. Whatever was there that night, whether it was a person, a trick of the mind, or something worse, I gave it permission to follow me. It didn't haunt a place. It haunted a choice. I still like being alone, but I don't go looking for silence in places that are meant to stay quiet. Sometimes, when I'm outside after dark, I feel like I'm being watched. I don't hear anything, but I know better than to wait around and listen. Some doors, once open, don't close right again. And now I know not to open them at all. We landed late. I remember the plane touching down with that stomach-lurching jolt, and all I could think about was how tired I was. The flight hadn't been particularly long, but everything had been delayed. Boarding, departure, baggage claim. By the time we stepped outside the airport, it was well past midnight. The air was heavy and humid, and even though it was dark, I could feel the day's leftover heat radiating from the concrete. We were in a country none of us had ever visited before. I think that made us more cautious than we'd usually be. My friend Ellie had been to this place before. Her parents' friends own a holiday house in the hills somewhere, about an hour's drive from the airport. She'd stayed there a few times growing up, but she'd never done the drive herself, and certainly not in the middle of the night. The rental car was small and boxy, some European make I didn't recognize. It smelled vaguely like stale coffee and air freshener, and the seats were still warm from whoever had used it before us. Ellie took the driver's seat since she'd been here before, and I sat up front with the GPS open on my phone. Our third friend, Anna, was in the back, already wrapped in a hoodie, hugging her knees to her chest. None of us spoke the language beyond a few basic phrases, and the street signs made me squint. The GPS didn't help much. It kept lagging and trying to reroute us. Ellie insisted she remembered the way. We drove for about half an hour on a main road that gradually narrowed. Street lights became less frequent, then vanished completely. Houses got further apart. Eventually, we passed through a small town with darkened windows and shuttered storefronts, then turned onto a road that Ellie thought was the right one. It wasn't. We realized that pretty quickly, but by then the road had changed into something more like a gravel track, uneven and muddy from earlier rain. The tires slipped more than once, kicking up mud that splattered across the sides of the car and the windshield. Ellie slowed down to a crawl, muttering under her breath. I could feel the car straining every time she tried to turn around, but there was no space to do it. We were surrounded by thick trees on either side, their branches forming a canopy that blocked even the moonlight. It was black, the kind of black where you couldn't even see your own hand unless you held it directly under the headlights. Ellie tried to reverse a bit, hoping to find a wider patch to turn. The tires dug in. We weren't stuck yet, but I could feel the car resisting. The muddy path wasn't letting us go easily. We all sat there for a second in silence. Anna was peering out her window, trying to make out anything beyond the darkness. I kept glancing at the signal bar on my phone. It was barely holding onto one bar. No data. GPS was frozen. That was when the lights appeared in the rearview mirror. At first it was just a glow, then the distinct double beams of headlights, cutting through the darkness like knives. They were still far off, but they were definitely coming toward us. Fast. My stomach dropped. All those movies, all those stories. It felt like the start of every one of them. A car breaks down or gets stuck in the middle of nowhere, and then someone shows up. Always a stranger. Always bad news. Ellie was gripping the wheel tightly. Her knuckles were white. Anna sat up straighter in the back, her voice sharp with panic even though she wasn't saying anything. We were frozen, all three of us, staring at those lights coming closer and closer. Ellie pressed the gas. The tires spun uselessly for a moment before catching enough to lurch us forward a few feet. She tried again to turn, but the mud dragged us down. The car tilted slightly, leaning into a shallow ditch at the edge of the path. The other car didn't slow down. It just kept coming. I reached into my bag and felt around for the tiny can of pepper spray I always kept, though I had no idea if it would do anything in a real situation. My hand was shaking. The car behind us finally slowed and came to a stop right behind ours. Its lights flooded our car's interior, casting shadows across our faces. I could see Ellie's chest rising and falling quickly. No one said a word. Then the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. He walked directly toward us. Everything in me screamed to lock the doors, but they already were. I double-checked anyway, and I had gone completely still in the back, not even breathing. The man reached our driver's side window and bent slightly, looking in. I couldn't see his face properly with the bright lights behind him. He tapped once on the window. I thought we were going to die. Then Ellie rolled the window down, just a crack, just enough to hear him. His voice was calm, even, friendly, almost, and he was speaking English. I couldn't understand it at first. It was such a contrast to what we were expecting that it didn't register. But then he repeated himself. He was a police officer. He spoke English. He'd seen our car go the wrong way a while back and had followed us when we didn't turn back onto the main road. I stared at his face. He looked like someone's dad. Middle-aged, neat, polite. He wore a uniform, but in the dark it hadn't registered. His badge was visible now. He was calm, and he didn't seem nervous or aggressive. just patient. He explained that the road we were on wasn't safe to drive on in a small rental car. There had been landslides recently, and the terrain was bad even in daylight. He knew the house we were trying to get to. It was a common rental spot. He offered to lead us there. Ellie asked if we should trust him. I nodded before I even thought about it. Something about him felt different from what I had braced for. He hadn't tried to scare us. He hadn't come to the window yelling. He seemed prepared, like this wasn't the first time someone got lost on that road. He walked back to his car, and we followed the taillights as he led us out of the muddy track. He drove slowly, making sure we could keep up. It took nearly 20 minutes to get back to the paved road, and another 20 or 30 to reach the actual house. The whole time, none of us spoke. The adrenaline had drained us. When we arrived, he parked just long enough to see us get inside. He didn't come in. He didn't ask questions or check IDs or anything like that. He just waved once, turned his car around, and drove off. The house was quiet, well kept, and unlocked just as promised. I still remember the smell of clean sheets and the soft buzz of the fridge humming in the background. I sat on the edge of the bed in the room, eye-picked, and tried to process everything. The thing is, nothing bad had actually happened. But I think that's what made it so scary. It was the waiting, the not knowing, the way your brain fills in the darkness with the worst possible stories. It's not always a monster or a killer. Sometimes it's just a mud road, a dead GPS, and a man walking up to your car in the middle of the night. It took me a while to fall asleep that night. I kept thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. What if we hadn't locked the doors? What if we had tried to drive further? What if the road had collapsed? Or if that man hadn't been a real cop? But he was. We checked later. Local law enforcement kept track of tourist routes. And the house we stayed at had a history of late-night arrivals getting lost. It happened enough that they sometimes had an officer keep an eye on the road during the late flights. It made sense. Everything made sense. But at 2 a.m., when your tires are spinning and headlights are coming closer and closer behind you, none of that logic matters. We stayed the whole week at that house. It was beautiful, peaceful, and safe. But every night, as the sun went down and the trees started to rustle in the breeze, I kept thinking about that moment in the mud. The headlights, the way we all froze. It's been a couple of years since then, but I still remember it vividly. Not because something terrible happened, but because of how close it felt. Because of how real fear is, even when there's no villain. Just darkness and the unknown. And maybe, sometimes, a man with a badge showing up at the exact right moment. When I was 10 years old, I lived in a house that had a loft as my bedroom. It wasn't anything fancy, just a raised space that sat above the living room, connected by a wooden staircase that didn't have any doors, just a railing that looked over the room below. The loft was open, which meant I could always hear the TV if it was on late or my parents talking in the kitchen. I liked it that way back then. It made me feel less alone at night, like I was part of the rest of the house even when I was upstairs. The loft was mine from the time I turned 9. It had angled ceilings from the roofline, and I remember hitting my head more than once when I sat up too fast on the side of my bed. I had an old twin mattress on a wooden frame pushed into one corner, a beat-up desk I never used, and a dresser with one drawer that always stuck. The carpet was a flat brown that my mom had vacuumed a million times but never really looked clean. That night, my best friend was spending the night. He'd been over probably a dozen times before. We were both 10, still at that stage where sleepovers meant staying up until midnight and talking about things we didn't fully understand. Movies we weren't allowed to watch, girls we didn't know how to talk to, weird stories we heard at recess. We didn't do anything crazy. We weren't those kinds of kids. We just liked the feeling of staying up late, like we were sneaking around without really doing anything wrong. One of the things we were into at the time was pretending we had a surround sound system. We'd seen it in a movie, some guy sitting in a chair with speakers all around him, hair blown back by the sound. I guess we wanted to feel like that. So I brought up the old kitchen radio from downstairs, a chunky one that my dad used when he grilled outside, and set on the floor near the loft railing. The other one was already upstairs, a smaller clock radio I kept by my bed that I sometimes listened to at night when I couldn't sleep. We tuned both of them to the same station. It was mostly music, some pop stuff we half liked, and a bunch of ads. The signal was a little fuzzy sometimes, especially on the old kitchen radio, but when it worked, it felt cool to hear the same thing playing from both ends of the room. It filled the space. I remember lying on the floor in the middle of the loft with my friend, just listening, pretending like we were in some high-tech movie scene. Eventually, we got up to brush our teeth. It was late, past 10, I think, but we didn't want to deal with our parents yelling at us for skipping bedtime routines. So we went downstairs, still laughing about something I can't remember now, and walked into the bathroom off the hallway. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I brushed my teeth with the same cheap toothbrush I always used. My friend used a spare one from the drawer, the one with the stiff bristles nobody else wanted. We spit, rinsed, made faces in the mirror like we always did, then turned off the light and headed back upstairs. I still remember the feeling I had when I reached the top step. It wasn't dread, not at first. It was more like confusion. The sound was different. Before we went downstairs, both radios had been playing some commercial. I think it was an ad for some energy drink. But when we came back up, the loft was quiet in that weird kind of way that doesn't feel empty, just wrong. Both radios were on. Their lights were glowing softly in the dark, one on the floor near the railing, the other by my bed. But instead of music or ads, all we could hear was static, white noise, low and steady, like the world had gone blank. I walked toward the clock radio by my bed. It was the one that usually had the better signal, so I figured maybe the kitchen one had interfered with it somehow. The static wasn't loud, but in the quiet of the loft, it felt huge. I didn't think much of it yet. Radios were old. Stations cut out. It happened all the time. I reached for the volume knob, planning to turn it down or maybe switch the channel, see if I could find something else. That's when it happened. Right as my fingers touched the dial, the static broke. Not all the way, just a sharp interruption, like a crack in the sound. And then, clear as anything I'd ever heard in my life, a voice came through. It wasn't a normal radio voice. It wasn't fast-talking or high-pitched or excited. It was deep, low. It sounded like it came from a place much bigger than that little clock radio. The words were simple, short, but the tone carried something that made my skin pull tight all over. Don't you dare touch that dial. That's all it said. No laughter, no distortion, no background noise. Just those 6 words, slow and deliberate. Then silence. Then back to static. Not the same quiet as before, though. The static felt heavier, like the space around us had changed. I froze. My friend did too. I didn't even look at him. I could feel he wasn't moving either. I pulled my hand back and sat down hard on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I wasn't that kind of kid. But something about that voice sank into my chest and stayed there. We didn't talk about it. We didn't say anything at all. I got up, walked over to the kitchen radio, checked it, but it was the same. Static. Nothing else. I didn't touch it. I didn't dare. Instead, we went back downstairs. Neither of us wanted to sleep up there anymore. We didn't say it, but we both knew. The loft, the radios, the voice, it was too much. We grabbed our pillows and a blanket, made a makeshift bed on the living room floor, and lay there in silence. The house felt different now. Every creak in the ceiling, every gust of wind outside, every little noise had weight. I don't remember if I slept much that night. I just remember the static. The next morning, everything was normal. My mom was already in the kitchen making pancakes. My dad was watching the news. The radios were still in place. I went up and turned them off. The static was still there on both of them. I unplugged the kitchen one and brought it back downstairs. We didn't mention what happened. For a while, I tried to forget about it. My friend never brought it up again, and I didn't either. But it stuck with me. For years, I thought about it late at night, wondering who or what had said those words. Not in a ghost story kind of way, but real. Radios didn't talk like that. Static didn't just turn into voices. And it wasn't a show or a prank or something on the station. It wasn't anything I could explain. As I got older, I started digging into radio interference, looking up how signals can cross, how certain frequencies can bleed into others under the right conditions. I found stories about truckers talking on CB radios that came through baby monitors or police scanners cutting into FM stations. I even read about some old radio DJs who would pre-record bits to mess with their listeners. Things that sounded creepy out of context but weren't meant to be. But none of those explanations ever really felt right. This wasn't some distant chatter or overlapping signal. It wasn't playful or accidental. It was direct. It was timed. It felt personal. Years later, when I was in college, I talked to a guy in one of my classes who was in a ham radio. He told me about something called a number station, strange broadcasts that just repeat numbers or codes, sometimes voices reading lists over static. They were supposedly used by intelligence agencies during the Cold War, though no one ever proved it. Some of them are still active. You can find recordings online. I listened to a few. They were weird, sure, but nothing like what I heard that night. What happened in my loft didn't have any of the structure or rhythm of a number station. It wasn't coded. It wasn't repeating. It was a one-time thing. A sentence spoken like a warning. Eventually, I told my dad about it. Not right away. Years later, maybe when I was 17 or 18. He laughed at first, but then he got quiet. He told me something that stuck with me more than any of the research I did. When he was young, maybe 12 or 13, he and his older brother had an old radio in their shared bedroom. One night, they were messing around with the tuner when it locked on a strange frequency. No music, no regular broadcast, just a voice. He said it spoke in a language he didn't understand, deep and smooth like a narrator. It went on for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped. They could never find it again. He told me he never figured out what it was. He assumed it was just some fluke, maybe a short-wave signal from overseas bouncing off the atmosphere. He said sometimes, under rare conditions, things like that happen. The air gets weird. Signals get scrambled. You hear things you're not supposed to. Maybe that's what happened in my loft. Maybe the radios caught something meant for someone else. Something sent out in the middle of the night by mistake or on purpose, and we were just there at the right time to hear it. I don't know. All I know is that for one moment, something or someone spoke through that static. Not to a crowd, not as part of a broadcast, but to me. Just 6 words. Just enough to freeze me in place. I haven't used that old clock radio in years. It's probably still up in a box in my parents' attic. I don't think I'll ever plug it in again. Some things are better left off the dial. I've never told this story to anyone outside of the guys who were in the car with me that night. I don't like talking about it. It's not one of those funny high school stories that you laugh about years later. It's not a lesson about youthful rebellion that ends in harmless trouble. It was something else. Something darker. Something that took a piece out of me and never really gave it back. It happened during the spring of our senior year of high school. I was 17, restless, and dumb in the way that only a high school senior with too much free time and too little self-awareness can be. My friends and I, 4 of us total, had developed a habit that started as a joke and grew into something way more serious than it should have. We used to follow people in our cars. Not people we knew, just strangers. We'd pick a car at random in a parking lot, usually from a gas station or grocery store, and follow it wherever it went, pretending like we were undercover agents or secret detectives on some made-up mission. We thought it was funny. We told ourselves it was just harmless fun, and we made rules. Never follow too close. Never get out. Never interact. Just follow, see where they go, then peel off and drive back, laughing the whole way. But over time, the game started to change. We started getting bolder, riskier. We'd test each other to see how close we could get, how long we could follow someone before they noticed. There was a kind of twisted thrill in it. You could feel your heartbeat in your neck when someone made a sudden turn, and you weren't sure if they had figured it out. We thought we were in control. That night, it was a Friday, right after sunset. We had been driving around for about an hour already. No destination. Just cruising the suburbs of our town, a place that felt too familiar and too safe to ever feel dangerous. It was that time of year when the evenings were getting longer but still had a chill to them, and the air smelled like fresh grass and engine exhaust. We pulled into the parking lot of the old supermarket on the east side of town, the one near the old water tower, where the lights flickered and the lot was always half empty. It wasn't even a conscious decision at that point. We just knew what we were there to do. We picked a car. I remember it was a gray 4-door sedan. Nothing special. Not new, but not falling apart either. It was parked a few rows over, near the edge of the lot, facing the street. We were parked on the opposite end, engine running, lights off. When the car pulled out, we pulled out too. They made a right turn onto the main road. and we waited about 3 car lengths before doing the same. It was me in the passenger seat and my friend Mike driving. The other 2 guys were in the back, low in their seats, snickering like they always did. I don't even remember what we were saying, probably something about what kind of person we thought was in the car ahead of us. That was part of the game too. Guess their story. At first, it was routine. The car drove straight for a while, then made a left and another left. The driver wasn't speeding or braking weirdly. We figured he hadn't noticed us. But then he made a sudden right onto a narrow side street that curved sharply uphill. We followed. The road was rough and unpaved in some spots, the kind of road that cut behind houses and dead-ended at tall fences or long gravel driveways. There weren't many streetlights here, just porch lights and the occasional flicker of a TV through a window. That's when things started to feel off. The driver was taking turns that didn't make much sense, double backing, looping through short streets, taking rights that led to nowhere, and then reversing. I started feeling it in my stomach, that crawling sensation like something wasn't right. He knew. I knew he knew. We all did. But we didn't stop. We just kept going like we were locked in. We laughed nervously, trying to downplay it, but the mood in the car had shifted. It wasn't funny anymore. Eventually, the car turned sharply down a road that led out of town entirely. I knew the area. This was the road that led to a neighboring town about 10 minutes away, a small place with scattered houses and more woods than buildings. No sidewalks, no stores, nothing open past 9 p.m. But we followed. It was like the deeper we got into it, the less anyone wanted to be the one to say, let's stop. I wasn't driving, so I didn't say anything, but I was gripping the door handle so tightly my fingers started to ache. We followed that car through 2 more towns, onto a cracked road lined with leafless trees and barely any other cars. It was quiet out there, the kind of quiet that presses in around you and makes your ears buzz. At some point, we lost him. 1 minute, he was turning right around a bend, and when we followed, the road was empty. No taillights, no sign of where he had gone. It was like he had vanished. We pulled over onto the shoulder, not really talking. Someone made a joke, but no one laughed. Mike put the car in reverse, and we started slowly creeping back the way we came, trying to retrace our path. That's when we turned onto a dead-end street without realizing it. The road sloped downward slightly and curved to the right, ending in a cul-de-sac with 3 houses spaced far apart. One of the houses had its porch light on and a car in the driveway. A different car, not the one we had followed. It was a pickup truck, older, with rust along the tailgate and a camo decal in the rear window. We didn't say anything. Mike slowed the car to a crawl, just enough to turn around in the cul-de-sac. We were trying to figure out if we should turn off the headlights or just keep going like we were lost. That's when the front door of the house opened. I'll never forget what I saw next. A man stepped out, late 20s maybe, thin but solid, like someone who works outside for a living. He was wearing jeans and a dark hoodie, and he had a shotgun pointed right at us. Not slung over his shoulder, not held down by his side, pointed, both hands barrel leveled at the windshield. He walked fast but calm from his front porch to the edge of the driveway, directly into our path. The way he moved, it wasn't hesitant. It wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. Mike slammed the car into reverse before the rest of us could even process what was happening. We lurched backward down the road, tires kicking up gravel, our bodies thrown against the seats. The man didn't run after us. He didn't even yell. He just stood there with that shotgun, watching us like he was daring us to come back. We didn't stop driving for a long time. We took back roads and then hit the main highway, still not saying much. Everyone had gone quiet. It was like the silence after a car crash. The kind where your brain is still trying to catch up to what just happened. When we finally pulled into a gas station back in our town, I got out of the car and threw up behind the dumpster. My hand was shaking so badly, I had to sit down on the curb. No one said anything to me. I think they were all too freaked out themselves. That night, I didn't sleep. Every sound outside my window made me jump. Every headlight that passed my street made me think someone had followed us back. I kept seeing his face. Not angry, not panicked, just dead calm, like he had dealt with this before. Like he'd already decided what he was going to do if we didn't turn around. I kept replaying it in my head. What would have happened if Mike had hesitated? If the car had stalled? If someone had tried to get out? We have fired? I believe he would have. There was no bluff in his posture, no hesitation in his aim. We never played that game again. We never even talked about it. I think we all felt the same unspoken thing, that we had crossed a line we never should have crossed, that we had been stupid and lucky and we'd used up all our luck in one night. It wasn't fun anymore. It was real. It took me a long time to stop looking over my shoulder when I drove at night. I started noticing how many people really do keep an eye on their surroundings. I started thinking about how many people are armed, how many are scared, how many wouldn't hesitate to defend their homes, especially in quiet, rural towns where the police are 20 minutes away. We thought we were invisible, just some kids playing around. But to someone else, we were a threat. A car creeping through their neighborhood with no reason to be there. For young men driving slowly, lights off, circling back. I saw it from his side after that night, and I didn't like what I saw. That shotgun didn't just scare me. It shook something loose inside of me. Something that had been too tightly wound in teenage arrogance and the illusion of safety. It made me realize that every dumb thing you do has weight. Consequences. Some doors don't open back up once you walk through them. I never told my parents. I didn't want them to know how reckless I had been. I didn't want them to look at me differently. But I changed after that. I grew up a lot faster than I wanted to. The world didn't seem like such a joke anymore. It felt sharp, heavy, real. Years later, I still think about that man. I wonder if he remembers us. If he ever tells the story of the time some kids from another town rolled up slow on his house, and he had to come out with a shotgun. I wonder if we were the first car he pointed it at. I hope we were the last. But more than anything, I remember the silence in that moment. The way it swallowed everything. And I remember knowing, without a doubt, that if we had pushed even 1 second further, we wouldn't have been driving home that night. We would have been headlines. And that's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Because it was real. Because it was my fault. Because it almost ended in a way that none of US could take back. And because we thought it was just a game. My junior year of college, I moved into this huge, old house a few blocks off campus. The place looked like it had been through generations of students. Big porch, flaking white paint, those heavy old doors that seemed like they belonged to another century. It was the kind of house that looked normal enough during the day, especially when there were people around, but took on a different kind of silence at night. Not quiet, just still. Too still. We had 4 people living on the first floor, 5 on the second, and then 2 more on the third who mostly kept to themselves. I was on the first floor. My room was right off the kitchen, next to the back door. It was a decent space, hardwood floors, a window that looked out to the alley. We were all students, most of us in different programs, and the house had this worn-in, chaotic kind of rhythm. Dishes piled up, someone always blasting music or stumbling and drunk at 3 a.m. Nothing out of the ordinary for college housing. The first time I went down to the basement, it wasn't because I needed to do laundry. The washer and dryer down there hadn't worked in years, apparently. Everyone took their clothes to the laundromat down the street. The basement was mostly just a party space. People would go down there with a Bluetooth speaker and some cheap lights, drink cheap beer, maybe hook up in the corners if they were drunk enough. It had concrete floors, low ceilings, exposed pipes. Cold, no matter the time of year. The walls were this strange mix of cracked concrete and old wood paneling that was probably installed sometime in the 60s. But there was one room in the very back of the basement that nobody ever went into. It was locked, and it had been since before I moved in. But apparently, that wasn't always the case. One of the girls who had been living in the house longer than the rest of us told me about it after a few drinks one night. She said that when she and a couple others first moved in, the door to that room was open. It was just a small room, barely big enough for a twin bed and a chair. But what she remembered most was what was in the room. She said there were several human teeth scattered on the floor and some tools. Weird tools. She didn't know what kind. She didn't stick around long enough to find out. After that, the landlord came by one day without telling anyone and locked the room. No explanation. Just showed up, locked it, and left. None of us had a key. The door was thick, old wood, maybe original to the house. Nobody really talked about it after that. It was just sort of understood that we stayed out of that room. I hadn't thought much about it until that one evening. It had been a long day. I had come back from class and passed out for a nap. When I woke up, it was early evening and I was starving. I went into the kitchen, turned on the stove, and started cooking. I think I was making pasta or something. Something easy. I was alone on the first floor at the time. I remember that clearly. Everyone else was either at the library or out with friends. The hallway light to my left flicked off. Just like that. I figured the bulb had finally died. The house was old and electrical issues weren't rare. But a few seconds later, it flicked back on. That made me pause. The switch for that light wasn't even in the kitchen. It was in the stairwell behind a closed door. I figured maybe someone had come in and was messing around. I waited a minute. Then the light turned off again. I rushed over to the stairwell door and yanked it open. There was nobody there. I walked down the hallway, checked the entry. Still nobody. I went down the stairs and peeked around the first floor. Empty. Nobody had come in. No one had left. I didn't hear doors open or close. I came back upstairs and tried to brush it off as some weird wiring issue. Maybe the switch was loose or something. I got back to my food, but I was watching that hallway light out of the corner of my eye the whole time. Sure enough, it flicked on again, then off, then on, like someone was standing there playing with the switch. That's when the music started. It came from the living room, which was right next to the kitchen. I felt this rush of relief, thinking finally someone else was home. I went into the living room, expecting to see someone setting up a playlist or watching a video. But the room was empty. The speakers we had set up in the corner were on, playing music, but the laptop that usually connected to them was closed and sitting on the windowsill. It wasn't even powered on. The screen was black. The little charging light wasn't blinking, nothing. Just dead. Still the music played. The TV was also on, stuck on one of those static-filled channels, buzzing faintly like it hadn't been touched in years. I slowly walked over and unplugged the speaker cord from the wall. The music stopped. Instantly. I remember trying to figure out what song it had been. Something instrumental, I think. Piano. But it was too jumbled in my head. The silence that followed was louder than the music had been. I just stood there in the middle of the living room, trying to piece it together. I could still smell the food from the kitchen burning slightly now. That's when the chills set in. Not a draft, not the cold you feel from an open window. It was like the temperature dropped around me, inside of me, like something had noticed me. I walked back to the kitchen, turned off the stove, and didn't even bother grabbing my food. I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove. No idea where I was going. I just needed to be somewhere else. I sat in a parking lot for almost an hour before I texted one of my roommates and asked if she was home. She said no. Nobody was. Everyone was still out. I told her something weird had happened, but I didn't explain it right away. I couldn't. It sounded crazy even in my own head. A few weeks later, I brought it up again. We were all in the living room, half drunk, eating pizza. I figured if someone had been messing with me, now would be the time they'd laugh and admit it. But instead, everyone got quiet, really quiet, and one by one, they started telling their own stories. One girl said she would sometimes wake up at night to the sound of her closet doors shifting. Not loud, just that soft sound of hangers brushing against each other, like someone had just moved them. She said she always kept her closet closed before bed, but sometimes it would be open in the morning. Another roommate mentioned hearing footsteps late at night. Above him, the sound of someone walking, slow and heavy, across the floor. But when he went upstairs to check, nobody was home. The doors were locked. One of the guys said the worst moment he'd had was waking up at around 3 a.m. and seeing a figure standing in the middle of the kitchen. He could see it clearly through the crack in his bedroom door. It was tall, unmoving, just standing there, staring in the direction of his room. Then it turned and walked toward the stairs. When he went out to check, again, nobody there. None of us had talked about any of this before. We had all just written it off as college house weirdness. Sleep deprivation, bad dreams, someone sneaking and drunk, that kind of thing. But once we put it all together, it felt like the house had been watching us. Not haunted, not cursed, just off. After that night, I started noticing more details. The tiny scratches on the inside of the stairwell walls, like someone had scraped their nails there over and over. The way the back door lock would stick, even after being replaced twice. The smell in the basement, faint, metallic like old blood. The landlord never came around. not even to collect rent. We paid online. No maintenance guy. No one answered when we called the number he left on the lease. I decided I needed to leave. I started looking for sublets, even though the semester wasn't over. I found a few blocks away, smaller place, just 2 roommates. Nothing fancy, but it felt normal. I moved out in the middle of the day while most of the house was gone. I didn't tell anyone exactly why, just said I needed more quiet to study. Nobody questioned it. A few months later, after I was gone, I got a message from one of the guys who had stayed behind. He told me they were all moving out too. One of the upstairs tenants had stopped leaving his room. At first, they thought he had just gotten depressed or something. But then someone realized they hadn't seen or heard him in over a week. They called the cops. When the police finally got in, the guy was gone. Not dead, just gone. His things were still there. Laptop open on his bed, clothes still in the closet. But no sign of him. No note. No sign of struggle. Nothing. Just vanished. Like he had been erased. They never found him. The other guy who lived upstairs moved out the same day. Said he was done. Didn't even pack all his stuff. That house still stands, last I checked. Different people live there now. Students, probably. Maybe they throw the same parties in the basement. Maybe they even tried opening that back room. I don't know. I never went back. I still think about it, though. Not every day, but enough. I think about that locked room. The teeth. The tools. I think about how it felt to stand in that living room while music played from a dead laptop. I think about the hallway light and the cold that wrapped around me like a breath on the back of my neck. I wonder if something was left in that house. Not a ghost. Not some horror movie thing. Just something bad. Something broken. Something human, maybe, left behind and sealed up. And I wonder what would have happened if I had tried to open that room myself. I think I got out just in time. I know I'm a little late bringing this up, and maybe it won't get much attention, but I've thought about this moment more times than I can count. It's one of those memories that sits heavy in your brain, one you never shake off. Even after all these years, it feels as vivid as it did that day. I was 7 or 8 at the time, maybe just starting to get used to going over to friends' houses without my parents hanging around. I remember it being a Wednesday, for some reason, midweek, the kind of day that blends into others when you're a kid. My friend lived on a quiet street that didn't get much traffic. There were houses on both sides, mostly one-story places with wide lawns and big trees out front. His backyard was massive, especially through my eyes at that age. It felt like it stretched out forever, ending in a thick wall of woods that seemed like a whole other world. We used to talk about building forts out there. We'd daydream in school about secret hideouts and tree houses, places where grown-ups couldn't bother us. That afternoon, we finally decided to do it. His little brother came along, even though we didn't really want him to at first. He was probably 5 or 6, kind of small for his age, but tough, always tagging along with us, even when we told him not to. We gathered some scrap wood, nails, a hammer, and whatever else we thought might help. None of it was good quality. We were just kids picking through his dad's junk pile. A few of the boards still had rusty screws sticking out of them. The hammer had a crack down the wooden handle. The whole plan was half-baked, but we didn't care. We were just excited to be building something. There had been some talk at school about coyotes being seen in the neighborhood. Not just at night, either. Some people had said they saw them during the day. That made us nervous, but in the way kids get nervous. Nervous, but excited. Like it added something adventurous to the day. I remember us talking about it on the way into the woods, especially about what we'd do if a coyote attacked us. The plan was stupid. We said we'd hit them with a hammer or throw rocks or something. Like that would have done anything, but made us feel braver. We followed the trail that started where the backyard grass ended. It wasn't much of a trail, really. More like a narrow gap where the grass thinned out and the underbrush wasn't too thick. The ground was uneven, full of tree roots and soft patches of dirt. Everything smelled like damp leaves and mud. It was the kind of place where the light changes. You walk 10 feet, and suddenly it feels cooler, darker, like you're stepping out of the world you know into something that doesn't quite belong to anyone. We weren't far in, maybe 5 or 6 minutes of walking, just enough to feel like we were out of sight of the house, but not so far we couldn't get back quick if we had to. We were still talking about where to build the fort when it happened. I remember I was looking down at the trail, watching where I stepped so I didn't twist an ankle or trip. My friend was walking just ahead of me, his brother behind him. We weren't in any kind of rush. And then his little brother stopped. Just completely stopped moving. No sound, no warning. He just froze like he'd hit an invisible wall. It took me a second to notice. I kept walking a step or two before I realized he wasn't coming along. Then my friend stopped too. He didn't say anything, just went still like a statue. That's when I looked up. Ahead of us, maybe 25 or 30 yards down the path, there was someone standing in the woods. Not moving, not saying anything, just standing. An older woman. I can still see her in my mind like it's burned into my memory. Her hair was this messy gray-white color, kind of frizzy, waving slightly in the breeze. She was wearing what looked like a white nightgown. Not a dress, not outdoor clothes, something you'd sleep in. It looked too thin for being outside, especially in the woods. She wasn't looking at us exactly. It felt like she was looking through us. Not past us like she was distracted, but more like she wasn't really seeing us even though she was facing our direction. There was something deeply wrong about it. Not dramatic or loud, just off. Like she didn't belong there. Like we were seeing something we weren't meant to. I remember feeling cold all over, like I'd been dropped in a bucket of ice water. It wasn't even a particularly cold day, but I could feel goosebumps rise up on my arms. The three of us didn't say a word. We just stared at her, waiting for her to move or speak or something. She didn't blink. She didn't shift. She just stood there. Now here's where it gets hard to explain. I've tried to put it into words so many times over the years. There was this weird brightness around her. Not glowing like in movies, not beams of light or sparkles or anything fake like that. But the air around her looked brighter, like the sun was hitting her differently, even though the rest of the woods were shaded. Almost like the trees bent the light toward her, or like she was standing under a spotlight none of us could see. After what felt like forever, maybe just 10 or 20 seconds in real time, she raised her right arm, slowly, and pointed. Not at us, behind us, toward the direction we had just come from. The backyard, the house. None of us said anything. We didn't need to. We dropped everything. Wood, hammer, nails. All of it. We just turned and ran. I don't think I've ever run faster in my life. The path felt longer going back. I remember tripping once and scraping my knee, but I didn't stop. I don't even think I felt it until we were back on the grass of the backyard. We ran all the way up to the house, pounding through the back door and into the kitchen, completely out of breath and wide-eyed. I remember my chest hurting, my lungs burning, the world spinning a little bit. I felt sick and dizzy and completely terrified. I remember grabbing the counter to steady myself. We told my friend's mom, of course. She brushed it off, said we'd probably seen someone walking their dog, or maybe an old neighbor. Told us we were imagining things. Said the woods can play tricks on your eyes if you're not used to them. At the time, I didn't know what gaslighting was, but it felt like that. Like someone was rewriting what I had seen just moments ago while I was still shaking from it. But the memory never went away. Not for me, not for my friend, not for his little brother. We've all talked about it since then. Years later, even after we'd all moved on to different schools, different cities. We never forgot it. Every time we described it, it was the same. The same white gown, the same stillness, the same brightness, and always the same ending. The raised arm, pointing behind us like she was telling us to go back. We didn't build a tree for it. We never went back into those woods again. But here's the part that stuck with me. The part that's kept me up some nights, even as an adult. A few months later, my mom mentioned something in passing while flipping through the local paper. There had been a small article, almost like a notice, buried deep in the back pages. A woman, older, lived a few blocks away, had gone missing. She had dementia, they said, had wandered off during the day while her husband was napping. She wasn't found for over a week. When they did find her, she was dead. They didn't give a cause. Just said it was exposure. She'd been wearing a white nightgown. They found her in the woods. Not the woods behind my friend's house, exactly, but connected. The same stretch of trees that ran along the backyards on that side of the neighborhood. No one knew how far she'd walked or how long she'd been lost. The article said she may have just sat down and never gotten back up. That's the part that haunts me. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't think we saw a spirit or anything supernatural. But I do believe we saw something real. Maybe we didn't know what we were seeing at the time. Maybe the light was playing tricks on us, like adults always say. But there's no denying that we saw an old woman in a nightgown, standing alone in the woods. And she looked wrong, lost, out of place, like someone who had wandered too far and didn't know how to get back. Maybe she was still alive when we saw her. Maybe not. Maybe we had stumbled onto something we didn't understand, and the pointing was just her way of trying to ask for help, even if we couldn't see it that way. All I know is I've never felt fear like that again. The kind that grabs you by the spine and won't let go. The kind that makes you run without thinking, without looking back. The kind that sticks in your bones. And I never walked that trail again. It was the summer we turned 13. My twin brother and I were old enough to stay home alone, and we took full advantage of that. Our parents both worked, but during the summer, Dad's hours got more relaxed. He'd be in and out during the day, running errands, helping neighbors, or fixing something around the house or yard. Sometimes he'd leave without saying much, just a grunt or nod, and come back late at night with takeout or groceries or a new part for the lawnmower. That summer, we got into the habit of staying up way past midnight, especially when it was too hot to sleep. The upstairs bedrooms trapped heat, and the air conditioning downstairs didn't quite reach our rooms, so we dragged blankets and pillows into the living room, lie on the floor near the box fan, and watch TV or play video games until our eyes hurt. Our parents didn't care much. As long as we didn't destroy anything or leave a mess, they were fine with us running on our own schedule. That night started like any other. It was late, probably around 10:30 or so. The TV was on low volume, just background noise while we both scrolled through our phones. The lights in the living room were dim. The box fan rattled in the corner, aimed directly at us. We were sprawled out on the carpet in shorts and tank tops, too lazy to move even when we got thirsty. I remember it clearly, even now. We hadn't seen Dad in a few hours, but that wasn't strange. Earlier in the afternoon, he was tinkering with something in the garage. Then he said something about needing to drive out to get a tool or part. We barely paid attention. When Dad left, he'd usually forget his keys. It happened a lot. He had this weird habit of knocking on the front door with a very specific rhythm. 3 quick knocks, then a pause, then 2 slow ones. Like a pattern. We knew it by heart. That was his way of letting us know it was him, so we could unlock the door without asking. So when we heard it, those same 3 quick knocks, then a pause, then 2 slow ones, we both jumped up. We didn't even think about it. It was just automatic. That was Dad's knock. It was past 11 p.m. by then, and it made sense that he would have come back by now. We walked over to the door. The hallway light was off, and the only thing lighting the front door area was the faint glow from the living room behind us. The house was quiet, too quiet like the sound had been sucked out of it. Before opening the door, we hesitated. Just a second. Maybe it was the darkness, or maybe we were just overtired. But something made us pause. Instead of opening it right away, we just stood there for a second. The peephole didn't work well. It was foggy, and you couldn't really make anything out at night, not with the porch light busted like it was. We waited and listened. Nothing. No sounds outside. Not even crickets. I remember thinking that was weird. Usually there were crickets, or cicadas, or the occasional car rolling down the street. But it was dead silent. We didn't open the door. We just stood there. Then one of us, I don't remember who, spoke out, loud enough to be heard through the door. Just a simple question, the kind of thing you'd say to make sure it was really your dad out there. No answer. We waited another few seconds. Still nothing. We glanced at each other, eyebrows raised. It felt a little off, but not scary, not yet. We both shrugged. Maybe we imagined it. Sometimes the house made noises, or the neighbors messed around outside. Sometimes sounds got carried on the wind. We walked back to the living room, back to the soft glow of the screen, trying to shake off the unease. Just as we turned around, the knock came again. Same rhythm. Exactly the same. 3 quick, pause, 2 slow. We both stopped cold. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. There was something unnatural about hearing it again, the same pattern, without any explanation. We froze, waited again. Still no voice. No footsteps. No keys jingling. Just silence. We weren't brave. Not then. We backed away, this time slower, not turning our backs to the door. Then we turned and bolted up the stairs. 2 at a time, skipping steps, our feet pounding the carpet. We got to the second floor and stood there by the railing, trying to hear if anything was still moving below us. Nothing. The fan was still humming. The TV still glowing. But the door hadn't opened. We started whispering to each other, half laughing, half nervous. Maybe it was Dad messing with us. He had a weird sense of humor sometimes. He liked pranks, but he didn't usually keep them going for long. Then came the sound of the doorknob turning. It was soft, but we both heard it, like metal brushing against metal. A subtle, steady twist, like someone trying to open the door quietly. But the thing was, our front door made a very specific click when it opened. And we didn't hear that. No click, just the turning. We crept back down the stairs, slow this time, half curious, half scared. We were trying to be quiet, like maybe if it was Dad playing a trick, we could catch him in the act. But we didn't see anything. The door was shut. The knob looked the same. No sign that it had turned at all. But I know I heard it. We stood there at the foot of the stairs, just staring at it. Then, out of nowhere, we heard footsteps. Not the gentle kind, not creaky or subtle. Heavy ones, running, fast, from the entryway toward the stairs. Behind us. We panicked. We didn't even look back. We ran again, full speed this time, up the stairs, heart pounding, hands scrambling at the banister. As we reached the landing and turned the corner toward our bedroom, we slammed the door behind us, hard. But something stopped it. Something was there. We felt it. The door didn't just bounce back. It flew open like it hit a wall, like it hit a person. There was a solid thud, and the door smacked backward into the wall so hard it bounced again. We fell forward onto the bedroom floor, crawling to the bed. We dove under the covers like that would protect us, heartbeats racing in our ears. Then we started screaming, at first just out of fear, then louder, desperate. The house stayed quiet for what felt like forever. No more footsteps, no slamming doors, no voices. But we screamed anyway until we were hoarse. Eventually, footsteps did come, from downstairs. Calm ones, familiar ones, our moms. Then our dads, slower, confused. They opened our door, turned on the light, and found us under the blankets, red-faced and shaking. We tried to explain what happened, but the words came out jumbled, panicked. They looked at each other, clearly not understanding. Mom thought we had a nightmare. Dad insisted he hadn't left the house all night. He had been in the garage and then upstairs in their room, watching a movie. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't opened any doors. He hadn't heard anything. We begged him to check the door. He did. It was locked from the inside. He said no one had opened it. The knob didn't feel loose, didn't look damaged. The porch was empty. The security light above the garage hadn't gone off. Nothing seemed out of place. But something had happened. We both heard it. Both felt the door bounce. Both heard the footsteps. It wasn't our imagination. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither of us said much. We just lay in our beds, wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, we double-checked everything. The porch, the door, the garage. We even looked around the backyard. No footprints, no scratches, nothing to prove what happened. We told our parents again. They nodded politely, but you could tell they didn't really believe us. Maybe they thought we were overtired. Maybe they thought we'd psyched ourselves out watching too many scary shows or playing creepy games. For a while, we tried to convince ourselves that was the case too. Maybe we imagined it. Maybe it was a sleep-deprived hallucination. But that didn't explain the feeling when the door hit something, or the footsteps on the stairs, or the sound of the doorknob turning. A few days later, Dad found something weird. He didn't tell us directly. I overheard him talking to Mom in the garage. He said he found a scuff mark near the side gate, a fresh one, like it had been jimmied open. And one of the tools, a long flathead screwdriver, was missing from his workbench. He couldn't remember if he'd moved it or not, but he seemed worried. After that, he changed the locks. He added a deadbolt to the front door and one of those sliding bars at the top. He also fixed the porch light. Never said why, just did it. Mom started setting the alarm system every night, even when we were home. Nothing happened again that summer, or after, but that night changed the way I felt about being alone. I stopped staying up so late, stopped sleeping downstairs, stopped ignoring that twist in my stomach when something felt off. Because whatever was out there that night, it wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a demon. It was a person, a real person. Someone who waited until after dark, knew the knock, knew enough to try to get in without making a sound. Someone who was already inside the house. Someone who knew how to hide. Someone who moved fast, quiet, and strong. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I still don't know how they got in, or what they wanted, or why they left without taking anything. I just know they were real. I know they were close enough to touch us. And I know we were lucky, because sometimes people don't need to break down a door. Sometimes they just knock and wait. I visited South Korea 3 summers ago, the year before I graduated high school. I went to spend a few weeks with an old friend who had moved there when we were in middle school. She lived in a busy part of Seoul, clean, lit-up streets, trendy cafes on every corner, crowded markets with smells of fish and fried food everywhere. The kind of place that felt busy but safe. She had been inviting me for years, and I finally convinced my parents to let me go. It was a Friday night, near the end of my trip, and we had stayed out late. It was summer, and the heat didn't let up even after the sun went down. We spent hours walking around, grabbing snacks from street vendors, sitting at a bubble tea place, just watching people walk by. When it got late enough that the streets started to quiet, we ended up in a small park that sat between 2 big apartment buildings. There were a few benches and some trees, nothing special. The place was dim, but it felt fine. No one else around but us, or so we thought. We were sitting on one of the benches, checking our phones, not saying much when I noticed a kid walk by. Maybe 10 or 11 years old. He wore a white t-shirt with some cartoon on it and dark shorts. He had a big cardboard box from a fried chicken place, the kind you get for takeout, and he sat down a few benches away from us. We didn't think much of it. Maybe he lived nearby. He sat quietly, hunched over the box, pulling pieces out slowly, eating them like he was trying not to make a mess. We barely paid attention to him. Eventually, we decided to head out. The streets were starting to feel emptier, and even though the park was quiet, it had that weird nighttime stillness that makes you start to notice every little sound. As we stood up and started walking toward the street, I glanced back and saw the kid stand up too. He dropped a half-eaten drumstick right on the ground and didn't even look down at it. He just turned in our direction and started walking. We didn't say anything. I figured he was heading in the same direction. The park only had one exit toward the main road. We kept walking. When we crossed the street, I happened to look to my right and saw him on the opposite sidewalk, walking parallel to us. It was probably nothing. Seoul is full of people walking at all hours. But then he smiled and gave a little wave. I slowed down a bit and looked at my friend. She looked just as confused as I was. She didn't recognize him either. We gave him a short, awkward wave back and kept walking. A little faster now. We weren't scared yet, just weirded out. I thought maybe he was just a friendly kid or maybe a little off. The streets were safe, and we weren't far from home. It was probably nothing. We turned a few corners, past a few small convenience stores, and then ducked into a coffee shop. It was one of those modern chains that stay open late. Bright lights, chill music, a few people typing on laptops or chatting quietly. We ordered 2 iced drinks and sat by the window, trying to relax. I kept my eyes on the street outside. The kid was gone. For a while, it was fine. My friend scrolled on her phone, sipping her drink. But then I saw him again. He came from the left side of the block, turning onto our street and walking slowly, head down like he was thinking about something. Then he looked up, saw the coffee shop, and kept walking toward it. I didn't say anything. I just nudged my friend and nodded toward the window. Her expression changed immediately. I could feel her get tense next to me. She didn't even look back at him, just said she needed to use the bathroom. I said I'd go too. The bathrooms in that coffee shop weren't inside the shop itself. Like a lot of places in Seoul, the bathrooms were part of the building complex and shared with other businesses. You had to go through a back door inside the cafe, into a hallway that led to a small corridor with restrooms. The hallway was lit, but a bit dimmer than the cafe, and there were no windows. It was quiet, too quiet. We got inside the women's room. There were 3 stalls, all empty. We went into the far stall together. My friend was shaking a little, breathing fast. I tried to calm her down, told her it was probably just a weird coincidence. Maybe he lived in the area. Maybe we were just scaring ourselves. Then the lights went out. Not like a flicker or a dimming, just total blackout. 1 second they were on, the next we were in pitch darkness. I froze. I didn't say anything. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear my friends breathing faster now. Then the door burst open. It slammed against the tiled wall so hard it echoed. Footsteps. Fast, hard footsteps. They didn't hesitate. The stall door was kicked open so violently that it nearly knocked me back against the toilet. Hands grabbed my hair, yanking my head back. Another hand clamped over my mouth. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe properly. I felt something cold against my neck, something metallic. I was shaking so badly that I couldn't even move. My friend was whimpering next to me. I could feel her being grabbed too, pulled down against me. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to be stabbed or raped or worse. My body just gave up. I couldn't fight. I was frozen. All I could do was feel the roughness of someone's palm against my face, the way the tip of something hard pressed against my skin, and the weight of someone leaning in close. Then a voice, close to my ear, barely above a whisper. Wrong one. Just that. And then nothing. The grip loosened. The hands pulled back. The figure stepped away and ran out of the bathroom. I heard the door slam again. Then silence. We didn't move for what felt like minutes. The lights didn't come back on. We sat there, holding each other in the dark, our backs pressed against the stall wall, too afraid to make a sound. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I felt completely empty. Eventually, we got up. We left the bathroom together, checking the hallway first. No one. Nothing. The cafe was still open. The lights were on in there. No one inside seemed to have noticed anything. We didn't go back in. We walked home, fast, checking behind us every few steps. We didn't talk the entire walk. We didn't say a word until we got inside her apartment and locked the door. We never saw the kid again. We didn't go to the police. We didn't tell her parents. We didn't even talk about it between ourselves much. Maybe we were scared that saying it out loud would make it real again. Maybe we just didn't have the words. A few nights later, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that moment. The lights going out. The door flying open. That whisper. I played it over and over in my head. Why us? Why that bathroom? And what did he mean, wrong one? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was a mentally ill kid. Maybe he had confused us with someone else. Maybe he had been planning something and we just happened to be in the wrong place. Or maybe he had done it before and we were supposed to be his next victims. A few days before I left, I went back to that park. I don't know why. I guess I needed to see it again. It was daylight. Kids were playing. People walked their dogs. It felt normal. I stood near the bench where the boy had first sat. I looked around. I even found a crumpled chicken bone lying in the dirt nearby. And something about that moment hit me hard. The kid didn't look lost or confused that night. He hadn't looked scared or panicked. He looked calm, like he had a plan, like he had done this before. I still think about that night. I think about what would have happened if we hadn't gone into that coffee shop, if we'd taken a different street, if the stall door had locked properly, if I had screamed, if he hadn't stopped. That phrase still echoes in my head sometimes. Wrong one. It scares me more than anything else, because it means there was a right one. And I don't know if he ever found them, but I know that he's still out there, somewhere. It was around 2007 when this happened, and I still think about it more often than I probably should. Back then, I was living in a small town that was slowly starting to grow. You know, the kind of place, just enough houses to call a neighborhood, just enough forest between the homes to still feel like the country. We were surrounded by dense woods, mostly pine and oak, with the occasional game trail snaking through them. The sort of place where every kid had a tree they thought was theirs, and every parent knew the value of a quiet walk after dinner. My son was about 5 at the time. I'd take him out on walks with me just to burn off some of that energy kids seemed to have an unlimited supply of. He was the kind of boy who'd run 10 feet ahead, stop to poke a stick into a hole, and then come running back full speed to grab your hand. He liked to be outside, even if he didn't understand the rules of being in the woods yet, like how to listen for snakes or how to spot deer paths. So I'd keep close and keep watch. We'd been out for about an hour that day. It was a Sunday, sometime in late October, because I remember the leaves were mostly on the ground and crunching underfoot. The air was dry and cool, and you could smell the shift toward winter in the dirt. We were on a trail I'd walked many times before, an old utility road that hadn't been maintained in decades, probably used back in the day to haul logs or check power lines. It eventually curved off and deadened into a mess of fallen trees and underbrush. That's when he told me he wanted to show me something. I didn't think much of it. Kids are always finding something. Usually it's just a weird stick, a feather, or some old beer can that's been rusting into the soil since the 80s. So I told him to go ahead and show me. He took off in that excited, bouncing trot kids get when they're leading the way. I followed behind him, a little amused, but also paying attention because this trail didn't lead anywhere. At least, I didn't think it did. He took me down a side path I'd never noticed. I'd walked past it dozens of times, but it looked like nothing, just a break in the brush that seemed too narrow to go anywhere. But when he ducked into it, I followed. It was tighter than I liked, and we had to push through some thorns and vines. But within a minute or so, the trail opened up, and to my surprise, it led to a small clearing. Right there in the middle of it, half hidden by overgrowth and shadow, was a shack. It was barely standing. One side had collapsed inward, and the roof sagged in a way that made me think it would cave in completely if the wrong gust of wind hit it. The walls were covered in that green-gray grime wood gets when it's been wet too long, and it smelled faintly like rot and mildew. You wouldn't have noticed it unless you were right up on it. I'd been through these woods dozens of times, and I'd never seen this place. My first thought was that it was some old hunter's shack, maybe even from before the neighborhood was developed. It didn't look lived in, but it also didn't look like it had just appeared overnight. It had clearly been there for years. I asked him how he knew about it, but he was already walking toward it. That's when he said it was where he and his friend Tom came to hang out when Tom couldn't sleep. Tom was his imaginary friend. I didn't think much of it. Lots of kids have them. It's normal, even healthy, psychologists say, but it was still strange how he spoke about it. So casual, like it was just a normal place they came to, like it had always been there. The weird part was he had never been in these woods before. Not this deep. I knew where we had walked, and I knew where we came from. I always kept him in sight, and we'd never gone off the main trail before. This was new ground. Still, there he was, walking confidently toward the front of this shack like he knew the place. I followed behind him, keeping my distance in case the building was more unstable than it looked. When he got to the front, he stopped and told me not to worry about going inside. He said Tom blocks the door with things so people won't steal his stuff. I tried the door anyway, just out of curiosity. Sure enough, it wouldn't budge more than an inch or two. Something solid was blocking it from the inside. It was dark in there, but I could just barely make out some shapes. Nothing clear, just vague outlines. It looked like furniture, maybe a shelf or something. But it was weird, the kind of weird that hits you in the gut before your brain catches up. I asked him again, in a kind of offhand way, how he knew about the shack. He just said Tom showed it to him. That was it. No more detail. No explanation. We stayed there for maybe a minute longer before I said it was time to go. I didn't like the feeling of the place. It wasn't fear exactly, just something off. The kind of off that makes your skin itch. He didn't argue, just turned and headed back the way we came. That night, I kept thinking about it. I knew those woods, or I thought I did, but that shack wasn't something I'd ever seen before. And the way it was hidden, you'd only find it if you knew exactly where to go. Even then, the brush was thick enough to hide it from view unless you were almost on top of it. I brought it up to him a few more times over the next couple of weeks. He'd just say Tom wasn't around anymore, that he got sick and had to leave. Then he stopped talking about Tom altogether. The way kids just forget things and move on like it never mattered. I wanted to go back, just to look at it again. Maybe get inside this time, see what was actually in there. But life got busy, and by the time I made time for it again, the woods had started to change. They started clearing it all out to build a Kroger and some parking lots. Within a year, the trail was gone, bulldozed and buried under concrete and drainage ditches. I stood there once near the spot I thought the trail used to start, looking out over a loading dock and a few dumpsters. Somewhere beneath all that asphalt and rebar, there was a shack, or what used to be one. Maybe they tore it down. Maybe they didn't even see it. Maybe it's still buried there, crushed under tons of earth, with everything inside still intact. I think about that sometimes. How something could exist, hidden in plain sight, and then just be erased, covered up and forgotten. Not even marked. Like it never mattered. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that crap. I never have. But I know what I saw and I know what my kid said. He knew where he was going. He knew about that place. And somehow, he knew not to go inside. Even now, all these years later, I can still see that door. Open just a crack. Enough to feel like something was waiting behind it. Watching. And I still wonder how he knew it was there. Or more than that, why he didn't want me to go inside. I was about 12 when it happened. I remember because it was right around the time I started staying up a little later on weekends, trying to watch whatever weird stuff I could find on TV. My parents weren't too strict, and they usually went to bed by 10 or so, especially on stormy nights when everyone just wanted to be tucked away. That night, the house had that quiet hum it gets when a storm is coming. Windows rattling just a little, the trees moving in heavy gusts, and a kind of tension in the air that makes everything feel a bit off. I was lying on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, flipping through the channels and eating dry cereal out of a plastic bowl. There wasn't much on, but I landed on an old episode of The X-Files. It was one of those late reruns they used to play on the Sci-Fi Channel. The episode was the one where this guy keeps seeing cockroaches crawling under his skin. At first, it was kind of funny in a gross-out way, but after a while, it started getting to me. The way he would scratch and tear at his arms, seeing things that weren't there, screaming like he was losing his mind. It got under my skin too. I didn't want to admit it, but I was getting creeped out. The lighting in the show was harsh, all pale greens and weird shadows, and the sound of the bugs skittering felt way too real with the storm building outside. Around midnight, a crack of thunder hit so hard it rattled the windows. I jumped, spilling cereal down my shirt. That was enough for me. I turned the TV off and made my way upstairs to my room. Our house was one of those two-story brick places that always felt colder than it should. My room was at the end of the hallway, and I remember walking past the open bathroom door and catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror. For some reason, I looked different. I don't know how to explain it. I just looked off, like my eyes were too wide or I had been staring at the screen for too long. I turned away quickly and got into bed, pulling the blanket up over my head like I used to when I was younger. The storm kept rolling in. The thunder was low and constant, like it was just circling around the house. I remember trying to fall asleep, but I couldn't shake the images from the show. I kept picturing bugs crawling under my sheets, scratching at my legs. I'd jerk my foot or swipe at my arm, only to realize there was nothing there. I must have eventually drifted off, though, because that's when the dream started. It didn't feel like a dream at first. I was lying on my back, unable to move, and there were these lights above me, blinding white like hospital lights, but way more intense. I couldn't move my head, but I could feel these figures around me. Tall, thin, gray. They didn't look quite human. I couldn't see their faces clearly because of the light, but I could feel them watching me. My chest was heavy, like something was pressing me down. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The worst part was the silence. There was no sound at all, just the light and the weight and the cold. It felt real in a way that dreams usually don't. The pressure on my chest was so strong, I thought I was going to die. Then I woke up, but it wasn't like any normal waking up. It was sudden, like being dropped from a height. I shot up in bed, gasping, covered in sweat. My room was pitch dark, except for a strange light filtering in through the blinds. For a second, I thought I was still dreaming. Then there was this massive bang, like an explosion. The whole house shook. It wasn't thunder. It was sharper, louder, like something had cracked right outside. The light didn't go away. It stayed. It pulsed like it was still active. My first thought was that something had exploded in the neighborhood. I got out of bed slowly, legs shaky, trying to figure out what was happening. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to break my ribs. I walked to my window and opened the blinds, and that's when I saw it. The sky was lit up, bright, not from the moon or street lights, but from something else. A pale, flickering glow that made everything look strange and flat, like in a dream. There was this weird shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising off the road, even though it was a cool night. I left my room and made my way toward the balcony at the front of the house. We had these sliding glass doors that led out from the upstairs hallway. The air outside was wet and smelled like burned wood. I stepped out onto the balcony barefoot, the tiles slick under my feet, and looked out over the street. That's when I saw the tree. Our neighbor's paperbark tree was split right down the middle. It was a tall, twisted thing that had been there longer than I had been alive. The trunk was split clean, like it had been hit with a giant axe, and one half of it was sagging down toward the ground, the other standing stiff with the top cracked off and leaning toward their roof. The bark was glowing, actual glowing. Embers were drifting through the air like fireflies, floating down slowly, catching the breeze and spinning in circles. Some of them landed on the lawn, hissing out as the wet grass smothered them. The light wasn't coming from the tree, though not really. It was the way the lightning had hit. It must have been a direct strike, and a leftover glow from the embers and the clouds had made the whole sky light up. My eyes were adjusting slowly, and as I looked around, I saw that the other trees nearby had little scorched spots too. The electricity must have jumped from branch to branch. The air felt charged, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I stood there for what felt like forever, watching those embers float down like burning snow. My legs started to ache from standing, so still, but I didn't move. I just kept staring, heart still thudding from the dream and the noise and the light. I was trying to make sense of it all, to piece together the line between what I'd imagined and what was real. Eventually, I went back inside. I closed the glass door slowly so it wouldn't make too much noise, then crept back to my room. I didn't bother turning the light on. I lay down in bed again, still dressed, just pulling the covers up over me. My room still smelled like ozone, that sharp, metallic scent that comes after lightning. My body felt heavy and exhausted, but I didn't fall asleep right away. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my breathing to slow down. In the morning, everything was different. The sky was gray, the kind of dull gray that makes the whole world feel quiet. I got up and went downstairs. My parents were already awake, and they were talking about the storm and how close it had been. My dad said he thought a transformer might have blown, and Mom was already on the phone with the power company. When I stepped outside, the smell of burned wood hit me again. I walked barefoot across the driveway and looked at the paperbark tree across the street. In the daylight, it looked worse. The split down the middle was jagged and blackened, with strips of bark peeled back and hanging like loose skin. The grass beneath it was scorched in patches. Bits of charred bark were scattered all across the yard. There were no more embers floating in the air, just ash stuck to the damp ground and the sides of cars. The neighbors were already out there, talking to someone from the fire department. I watched them from distance, not wanting to go over. It felt too personal, like I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. I didn't tell anyone about the dream, or the light, or how real it had felt. I didn't tell them about the pressure on my chest, or how I'd woken up to find the same white light still in the sky. I knew it was probably just my brain tying things together, the show, the storm, the fear, but I also knew how it had felt. Dreams don't usually leave your skin cold like that. I stayed away from the X-Files for a long time after that. I couldn't even hear the theme music without getting this tight feeling in my chest. I didn't tell any of my friends what happened, because I knew they'd either laugh or start spinning it into some alien story. That wasn't it. It wasn't aliens. It wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was just a storm, a dream, and a tree that happened to get hit by lightning at the worst possible moment. But sometimes, even now, I think about that night. I think about how real the dream felt. And I think about how, for just a few seconds, I honestly wasn't sure whether I was awake or still stuck on that table. And maybe that's the scariest part. Not the dream, not the noise, not the fire in the tree. But that moment, standing on the balcony in the flickering light, heart pounding, when I couldn't tell the difference. Because sometimes reality doesn't feel quite real either. I grew up in a house that never felt right. Even as a little kid, I understood that something about it was off. It was a two-story place built in the late 60s. The neighborhood was quiet, old trees lining the street, cracked sidewalks, and distant traffic humming like white noise. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, right next to a wooded lot that had never been developed. The trees behind our backyard ran deep, and sometimes at night, I'd hear things moving out there, branches snapping or leaves rustling, but I never saw anything. The house had these long hallways that always seemed a little darker than they should have been, even in the middle of the day. It had an odd layout too, rooms that didn't connect the way you expected, closets that were deeper than they looked from the outside. One hallway upstairs turned at an angle that made it feel like it didn't belong in the house at all. My bedroom was at the end of that hallway. I was around 10 when this happened. I had the smallest room upstairs, a narrow rectangle with a low window on one wall and a closet across from the bed. My bed was pushed against the wall under the window. It was just a twin and barely had room for me, never mind the dog. But I used to let him sleep with me anyway. Ringo was a huge dog. We'd gotten him when I was little, and he grew fast. Some kind of mix, maybe German Shepherd and something bigger. He had thick, coarse fur and a huge head. When he stood on his hind legs, he was taller than me, and when he laid across the bed, he usually took up the bottom half entirely. But I loved him. He made me feel safe. I needed that safety back then because I was terrified of the dark. I'm not sure exactly when the fear started, but it was always there. I never let my eyes open once the lights went out. Not even a crack. I'd pull the covers over my head and keep them there until sleep took over. I told myself if I couldn't see anything, nothing could see me either. It sounds dumb now, but when you're a kid, logic like that feels airtight. That night was the same as any other. I brushed my teeth, climbed into bed, and shut off the lamp on the nightstand. The room went black instantly. The house was quiet. I could hear the air conditioning kick on downstairs and the creak of the roof settling in the late summer heat. I kept my eyes closed, clutching the sheets under my chin. I remember counting in my head to calm myself. I used to do that to stop from thinking about the house too much. Then I heard the sound of my bedroom door opening. It wasn't a loud sound, just the soft metallic clunk of the doorknob turning and the whisper of the hinges. But I knew it was instantly. My body stiffened, but I didn't open my eyes. I never opened my eyes. I waited, holding my breath. Then I felt the bed shift. It dipped near the foot, just like it always did when Ringo jumped up. He had a very specific way of getting on the bed, like he tried to be careful about it. He'd climb up from the side, then step over until he was lying across my legs. The feeling was familiar. The weight was just right. So I thought it was him. Still keeping my eyes shut, I reached down toward my feet, trying to touch him. My hand slid over the blanket, down past my knees, and into the space where he should have been. I felt nothing but the blanket. I tried again, leaning up a little this time, patting softly at where I felt the weight. Still nothing, but the weight was there. I could feel it like something solid was resting across my legs. Not pressure exactly, it didn't hurt, but weight. A kind of heaviness that shouldn't have been there without a body. I hesitated. Then I sat up. I still hadn't opened my eyes, even now. My brain was screaming that it was Ringo, that I was just reaching in the wrong spot, that maybe he'd curled up funny and I couldn't quite get to him. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The air in the room felt too still. The silence was heavy. I finally opened my eyes, and there was nothing there. The bed was empty. The room was dark, but not pitch black. Just enough light from the streetlight outside to see shapes. The blanket was flat. There was no dog, no shadow, no movement, but I could still feel the weight pressing down on my legs like something invisible was still there. I froze for maybe 3 seconds. Then I screamed. I screamed so loud and hard my throat burned. I didn't stop until I heard feet pounding up the stairs and my bedroom door burst open. Everything after that is blurry. My mom rushed in, turned on the light, started asking questions, checking the bed, touching my legs. The weight disappeared the second she opened the door. Ringo came trotting in right behind her, looking confused and wide awake. I remember curling into her and shaking. I don't remember if she said anything. I don't remember if I slept in my room again that night. What I do remember is that I wouldn't go to bed without Ringo sleeping next to me for weeks after that. Over time, I tried to convince myself it was just a dream. I told myself maybe I'd been half asleep and imagined it. But I know how that bed felt. I know how Ringo's weight felt when he laid on me. This was the same, but he wasn't there. That wasn't the only time weird stuff happened in that house. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps upstairs when no one was up there. Once I heard someone knock on the wall behind my headboard in the middle of the night. 3 hard knocks. I didn't move. I didn't sleep after that. My closet door would open sometimes, even though I always made sure it was closed. I never told my parents about all of it. I didn't think they'd believe me. Or maybe I was afraid they would. The house always had this feeling. Not haunted, not like a ghost story, just wrong. Like it was built on the wrong piece of land or had too many corners that collected something that shouldn't have been there. I don't know, but I felt it. You'd walk into a room and feel like someone had just been there, or like you were being watched from the hallway, even when you were alone. The worst part was the silence. The house could be so quiet it rang in your ears. It felt thick, like it was pushing against you. I learned to sleep with a fan on just to drown it out. That helped a little. Years went by. We eventually moved out of that house when I was in high school. My parents never said anything about it, but I could tell they weren't attached to it. They sold it faster than I expected. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know if they had their own stories. I'm an adult now, and I've lived in a few different places. Apartments, condos, rentals. Some quiet, some noisy. None of them ever gave me that same feeling. That deep, low fear that you can't quite explain. That instinct that something is just slightly off, and you can't prove it, but you know it. I think about that night sometimes. I remember how real the weight on my legs felt. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't a dream. I was awake. I had my eyes open, and I saw that there was nothing there. I tried to come up with rational explanations. Maybe it was some kind of waking dream. Maybe my legs were just going numb from how I was sleeping and my brain misread the sensation. Maybe there was a dip in a mattress and I noticed it more because I was scared. But the bed didn't sag that way. The mattress was old, but it didn't hold shapes like that. And the pressure only disappeared when my mom came into the room. That's what sticks with me the most. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some monster from under the bed. It was just something strange, something my brain still doesn't know how to explain. But it was real. I've never felt fear like that since. The kind that doesn't just stay in your chest, but fills your entire body. Like your skin is trying to crawl away from your bones. Like you want to scream, but you can't breathe deep enough to do it. That house did something to my head, I think. It left something behind in me. I still sleep with the blankets pulled up over my shoulders. I still don't open my eyes if I wake up in the dark. My brain remembers that weight. My body does too. I've never talked to anyone about it. Not really. I've never tried to tell the story in full. Not because I'm afraid people won't believe me, but because it makes me feel like a kid again. 10 years old, hiding under a blanket, counting to 100 in the dark, hoping that when I open my eyes, everything would be normal again. It's been years since I left that house. I drive past it sometimes. The new owners put up a new fence, trimmed back the trees, even painted the shutters. It looks brighter now, less intimidating, but I know what it felt like inside. And I know what happened in that room. Whatever it was, I felt it. And it's never let me forget. It's been 8 years since this happened, and even now, I still get this heavy feeling in my chest when I think about it. I'm not the kind of person who gets scared easily. I've lived through my share of hard times. Couch surfing, working dead-end jobs, walking home in the dark, that kind of stuff. But this one time, this one place, it got to me in a way nothing else ever has. It still messes with my head a little, especially when I pass that street on the streetcar. I try not to look, but sometimes I do, and I can feel my heart thump like it did that night. I can still picture those red eyes. I was 20 then. Me and my best friend were both in tight spots, broke, desperate, and trying to stay in the city while we got our lives together. Rent was insane even back then, and we needed something fast. We had about a week to figure out before she would have to move back in with her mom, and I'd probably end up crashing in someone's garage or worse. We were hunting through the rental listings like our lives depended on it. Most of the stuff we found was way out of budget or complete scams. But then we saw this basement apartment a bit outside downtown. It was a 2-bedroom, $4/$650. That's almost unheard of, even for a basement. The pictures were terrible, grainy, dark, and crooked, but you could make out 2 separate bedrooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a small living area. It looked like garbage. Honestly, but we figured we could stick it out for a few months, save a bit, and find somewhere better. When we went to see it, the guy showing it to us was the landlord. He lived in the main house upstairs. He was maybe mid-40s, tall, greasy dark hair, and had this way of staring that made me want to avoid eye contact. He wasn't exactly friendly, but he wasn't aggressive either. Just off. Like he was trying to act normal, but didn't quite know how. The apartment itself was worse than the photos. There was a musty smell, like wet drywall and mildew. The ceiling was low, and the lights were these buzzing fluorescents. But it was available immediately, and we needed it. The landlord said something about storage being accessible through a door in the back wall of one of the bedrooms. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just wanted a roof over my head and a door that locked. I took that room, the one with the storage access. It was bigger, and my friend's room was more like a glorified closet. It had enough space for a twin mattress and barely any room to move. We moved in the next day. I threw my mattress on the floor, pushed my suitcase into a corner, and hung a couple of sweaters on a nail I found in the wall. The place didn't have much furniture. We had to bring what we could carry, some folding chairs, a cheap table from Value Village, a couple of lamps. The first few nights, I chalked the bad feeling up to stress. Moving is hard, and the place wasn't exactly comfortable. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sweaty, panicked, but I couldn't remember why. Just this horrible feeling like I'd had a nightmare I couldn't recall. It happened again and again. I'd bowled up in bed, certain that someone was in the room with me, even though I was alone. After a few nights of this, it started getting worse. Every time I was in my room, especially at night, I felt like something terrible was going to happen. Not in a vague way, but like someone was going to crash through the wall and kill me. That wall, the one with the landlord's storage, started giving me the creeps. I couldn't explain it, but I became obsessed with it. I kept looking at it, like I was waiting to see something come through it. There was no lock on the storage door, just one of those simple round handles. I shoved a chair in front of it at night, then added my suitcase and a box of clothes. It didn't make me feel better. My friend had noticed how I was acting and offered to switch rooms, but there was no point. Her room was so small it barely fit her stuff. We decided to share the bigger room for a while until we found somewhere better. We set up both our mattresses on the floor and tried to make it feel less depressing. We hung a bed sheet over the window, stuck some fairy lights on the wall, but that feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got worse with both of us in there. It felt like something unseen was watching us, pressing against us from the walls. Like we were being squeezed. Some nights we barely slept. We had a mutual guy friend we'd known for a while. He was the one who introduced us, actually, and he started coming by more often. He'd stay over sometimes, usually crashing on the old love seat in the corner of the living room. We'd all watch movies, smoke a little weed, eat junk food. It was the only time we felt halfway normal. When he was around, the heaviness lifted a little. Maybe just because we felt safer with someone else there. But then things started getting weirder. One night, I took the dog out back before bed. We had this narrow walkway on the side of the house that led to a patch of grass surrounded by a rickety wooden fence. The backyard was barely lit, just a weak glow from a porch light. As I stood there with the leash in my hand, I looked up at the windows of the main floor. I swear someone was standing there, watching me. The light was off, but the shape was there, just a darker shadow among shadows. I couldn't see a face or anything, but I felt it, like a weight on my skin. I got spooked and yanked the dog back inside. I didn't say anything to my friend right away, but the next night, she came out with me and she noticed it too. Her body tensed up, and we both looked at each other without saying anything. We didn't need to. We were both seeing it. From then on, we only went out back together, always with the dog on a leash, always watching the windows. We started closing the curtains more often, even though we barely got any sunlight in the basement anyway. The house just felt darker and darker. One night, the three of us were out late, just hanging at a 24-hour diner, drinking coffee, talking about dumb stuff, trying to pretend life was normal. Our friend left a little before us, saying he had to be up early. We stuck around a bit longer, didn't get back to the house until around 3 a.m. We were tired, but we knew if we didn't take the dog out then, we'd regret it in the morning. So we went out back one last time, half asleep, trying to hurry things along. I had the dog on her leash, walking toward the fence when I saw it, shadows, Not just one, but several. It looked like people slowly walking toward us from the far end of the yard, past the broken fence. They didn't make any noise. No footsteps, no talking. Just dark shapes moving toward us. It didn't feel like normal people walking by or kids playing a prank. It felt wrong. Like we weren't supposed to see them. Like we were interrupting something we shouldn't have. My body reacted before my brain did. I grabbed my friend's arm and yanked her toward the door. I couldn't stop myself from yelling, even though I didn't want to. I needed to get inside. I needed to get away from them. She didn't question it. She saw them too. We slammed the door shut and locked it. Then we stood at the bottom of the stairs, breathing heavy, trying to calm down. That's when we saw the windows, those tiny basement windows that face the backyard. And in one of them, two glowing red dots stared in at us. It didn't make sense. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't the porch light. These were eyes, set low, almost at our eye level, unmoving. I don't know how long we stared at them. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like forever. I screamed again, full-on panic now. I yelled our friend's name, even though he was gone. Right then, my friend's phone started ringing. It was him. He said he couldn't sleep and felt like he needed to call us. We begged him to come back. He showed up 20 minutes later, out of breath, eyes wide. We didn't sleep that night. None of us did. He ended up staying over almost every night after that. We kept the lights on. We didn't go out back anymore unless it was daylight. We started sleeping with knives under our pillows, which sounds stupid now, but it made us feel better. We didn't tell the landlord. We barely saw him. And when we did, he acted like we were bothering him. He'd appear without warning sometimes, coming down through the storage door to grab something. Never knocked. Just came in. Said it was his right as the owner. We were too scared and too broke to fight him on it. The last straw came a few days later. We were all in the living room when we heard footsteps upstairs, even though the landlord was supposedly away. Then the light in the stairwell turned on by itself. No one touched the switch. We packed that weekend. We left some stuff behind. Cheap furniture, dishes, old clothes. It wasn't worth it. We didn't even break the lease. We just got out. We never figured out what happened that night with the red eyes. I try to tell myself it was a trick of the light, maybe someone with night vision goggles, or some sick prank. But I don't really believe that. I've never seen anything like it since. Later on, I did some digging. Turns out that house had a history. It used to be a group home back in the 90s. There were complaints from neighbors, police calls, noise issues. A few years before we moved in, a tenant had been arrested for keeping cameras in their shared house. Nothing confirmed, nothing in the papers, just whispers on old forums and buried threads. We never filed a police report. We didn't want the attention. We just moved on. Still, even now, when I pass that block on the streetcar, I get that old feeling in my gut. That heaviness, that sense that someone is watching. I never look at the house. I just stare straight ahead until it's out of sight. Some places are just wrong. I don't know what was happening in that basement, or who was watching us, or why those shadows were there. But know what I felt, and it was real. Too real to ever forget. I was in middle school at the time, either 7th or 8th grade. It was the part of the school year where the days were short and cold, and the sun seemed to disappear way too early, which always made the house feel bigger and darker than usual. My younger brother, who was 2 years behind me in school, was there with me that night. Two of our friends were over, one his age and one mine. Our parents were out at some dinner party not too far away. I think it was just a few neighborhoods over, maybe 10 or 15 minutes away at most, but they said they'd be gone for several hours. They left around 6:30, just as it was getting dark. They had given me the usual rundown. Lock the doors. Don't open for anyone. Don't mess around in the kitchen. Don't answer the landline unless you see their number on the ID. They always made sure to be very specific about locking up, especially the front door, which had a weird setup. It was a set of double doors. The right-hand side was the one we always used. It had the handle, the lock, the deadbolt. The left-hand one never moved. It stayed in place unless you deliberately unlatched it from the top and bottom. You had to get down close to the floor to slide the bottom latch free, then stretch up to release the top one. It was a bit of a hassle, and I'd only seen my dad do it a few times when we were bringing in furniture or big packages. Normally, it just stayed locked tight. We were all downstairs in the basement around 7. The basement was half finished, meaning one part was carpeted and warm with some furniture and an old TV, and the other part was unfinished storage, cold concrete floors, exposed wood beams in the ceiling, and shelves stacked with seasonal junk and boxes of stuff we never used. We were huddled in the finished half, sitting on beanbags and floor cushions, passing around controllers, playing whatever the popular shooter game was at the time. The dog, Nugget, a little terrier mix who never sat still, was with us for a while, but she started scratching at the door and whining like she needed to go out. It was one of those little things I took pride in when my parents weren't home. I wasn't allowed to do much, couldn't drive, couldn't cook, but letting the dog out, locking the doors, handling things like that made me feel older. Like I was in charge, even if just for a little while. So I grabbed Nugget's leash and walked her up the basement stairs, through the first floor, and to the front door. I didn't even consider using the back. Our backyard was big and unfenced, and the back porch light barely lit up anything. The front had a better view of the street light, and I could see more from the front porch. I opened the main side of the double doors, the usual right-hand one. I didn't touch the left side. I let Nugget out onto the front lawn, stood in the doorway holding the leash loose in my hand while she sniffed around in the cold grass. It was completely quiet out there. Not a car, not a person. Just that kind of neighborhood stillness that settles in after dark, especially in winter. I looked around a little bit, habitually scanning the yards, the street, the sidewalks, but nothing was out of the ordinary. No headlights, no joggers, no neighbors out getting the mail. Just a couple porch lights on in the distance, and the faint hum of the transformer at the end of the street. Nugget finished up and trotted back toward the house, and I stepped aside so she could dart inside ahead of me. She always waited just inside the door, tail wagging, waiting for a treat she probably didn't earn. I gave her a quick scratch behind the ears, shut the door behind us, and locked it. I remember that part clearly because it was drilled into my head. I turned the handle after locking it, just to make sure. It didn't move. I gave an extra tug and pulled just in case. Still locked. Then I double-checked that the deadbolt was turned all the way, and I even gave the left-hand door a quick push to see if it budged. It didn't. Both doors were secure. We went back downstairs, the dog settling down somewhere near the couch. The next 20 minutes, or so, were completely normal. Just the sounds of the game, the occasional burst of laughter when someone messed up. It was warm down there from all our body heat and the TV, and I remember wishing I hadn't worn a hoodie. Nugget was curled up near us, legs twitching like she was dreaming. No one had gone upstairs. No one even left the basement, except maybe one of the younger kids to grab snacks, but definitely not to go to the front door. Then something happened. I didn't even notice it at first. It was my friend. He was sitting closest to the stairs, who suddenly pointed out that the dog was no longer asleep. She was laying down, awake now, just 5 or 6 feet away from us, which wouldn't have been weird, except that I remembered letting her in from outside. And then I froze. It hit me so fast and so hard that I couldn't speak for a second. I let the dog out earlier. I never let her back in. I was dead sure of it. I let her out, waited for her to pee, let her back inside, then locked the door. But now, she was back with us, and I didn't remember opening the door again. I stood up quickly. There was a kind of sick tightening in my chest, like everything suddenly wasn't right. I didn't even say anything. I just bolted up the stairs, skipping the last few steps and turning sharply at the top to get into the front hallway. And I saw it immediately. Both doors were wide open. Not cracked. Not just one open. Both of them. Wide open like someone had pulled them apart and walked right in. The left side, the one that should have been locked top and bottom, was hanging wide like it was no big deal. The right side was fully open too. Cold air was spilling into the house. The porch light was casting this yellowish glow across the hardwood floor, and there was nothing but silence outside. My stomach dropped, so heart made me dizzy. I ran to the door and slammed both sides shut, twisting the deadbolt and locking the handle. Then I got down on the floor and locked the bottom latch on the second door, stood up and did the top latch, my hands shaking the whole time. The entire house was too quiet, and I couldn't even hear the dog moving around anymore. It was like all the air had been sucked out. I checked the garage through the door in the mudroom. Our parents' car wasn't there. The garage was empty and dark. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the house phone from the charger and dial my parents' number. My hand was shaking so bad I had to try it twice. When they picked up, I could barely keep my voice steady. I explained what had happened the best I could. They said they were leaving the party immediately. I put the phone down and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find. I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I wasn't thinking clearly. My brain was filled with static. I kept looking down the hallway, expecting to see someone step around the corner, even though I hadn't heard anything. I wanted to believe it was just the wind. Maybe the door hadn't latched properly. Maybe I'd messed up. But the second door, the left one, that latch doesn't open unless someone unbolts it for both ends. There's no way I could have done that by accident. And Nugget, she was inside. No one let her in. I hurried back downstairs. The others were already huddled together by the TV, and I told them to move into the back part of the basement, the cold storage section. It was the only place in the house with no windows and just one way in. We moved quickly but quietly. I closed the basement door behind me, turned off the lights, and we crept into the storage area. We huddled together behind the shelves and water heater. It was cold back there, and the floor was hard and gritty with dust. Every sound in the house echoed faintly through the floor above us. At one point, I thought I heard a creak from upstairs, like someone stepping softly on the wood floor near the kitchen. But I couldn't be sure. I didn't know if I was imagining it or not. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. We stayed there like that for what felt like an hour, though it was probably more like 20 minutes. It was the longest 20 minutes of my life. My legs started cramping from sitting so stiff, and my hand was sore from gripping the knife too tightly. Every little noise felt like a threat. We didn't speak. We barely even breathed. When my parents finally arrived, I heard the garage door open first, and the sound of the side door opening and closing, heavy steps on the kitchen tile, and then their voices calling out. I stood up slowly, the knife still in my hand, and crept to the door at the edge of the storage room. I opened it just enough to peer out, and I could see my dad in the hallway, scanning the house. We all came out slowly. My parents were visibly shaken. They checked the whole house, every room, every closet. Nothing was missing. Nothing else seemed disturbed. But the front door? My dad confirmed it. The left side had been completely unlatched, and I hadn't done it. They called the non-emergency police line, and an officer came by a little after that. He walked through the house, checked the doors, and took down the information. But there wasn't much he could do. No forced entry, no signs of a break-in. He suggested maybe one of us had forgotten to shut it properly. Maybe we were just scared kids letting our imaginations get carried away. But I know what I saw. I remember locking it. I remember checking it. Nothing else ever came of it. We never saw anyone suspicious around the house in the weeks afterward. Nothing was stolen. Nothing happened again. But I never forgot that feeling, that deep, gnawing certainty that someone had been in the house with us, walking around silently, slipping in and out without leaving a trace. After that, I never trusted that door again. Every time I let the dog out, I watch her like a hawk. I stood there, hand on the knob, waiting for her to finish and come back in, locking it tight the second we were both inside. I'd double-check the latches, then check them again. I'd walk past the front door a dozen times before bed. It was early spring when my dad asked me if I wanted to tag along while he helped a buddy of his with some work on a house he had just bought. I didn't know the guy, but my dad said they used to work together doing drywall a few years back. His friend had recently bought an older property a few towns over and was fixing it up to either flip or rent. The place was mostly gutted already, and my dad was helping install internal siding panels in the main room. I didn't have anything else going on, and I figured it'd be good to get out of the house. Plus, I liked working with my hands and watching how things came together. I'd helped Dad with small stuff before, measuring, cutting, lifting. He wasn't the type to talk a lot when working, so I mostly followed along quietly and learned just by watching. We got to the place around mid-morning. It was out in a quiet area, not quite country, but not quite town either. The house was set back from the road behind some overgrown shrubs. It was a single-story building, a little lopsided looking, with dirty white siding and faded blue shutters. The front door was new, though, and the windows looked recently replaced. It had that weird mix of old and new that you often see in homes that are halfway through being fixed up. Inside, it was stripped down to studs in some rooms. The flooring in the main room had been pulled up, but the subfloor was mostly intact. The house smelled like dust and dried wood, with a hint of mildew coming from the back where the bathroom was. The main room was where most of the work was being done that day. It was the biggest space in the house, with one long wall that ran from the left edge of the front of the house all the way to the rear corner. That wall was the first thing they measured before getting started. I stood off to the side while my dad and his friend stretched the tape across, end to end. I remember hearing my dad call out the number, 10 meters exactly from one corner to the other. He was old school and always preferred using meters for big jobs, said it kept things simpler. They made a few markings and then went back outside to grab the first few panels from the back of the truck. I followed behind, not really doing much yet, just keeping an eye on things. Dad slid a few panels out from the back, and his buddy lit a smoke while they stood by the open tailgate. That's when Dad looked back at the house. I remember he stopped moving, just kind of froze there with one hand on a panel and the other holding the tape. He looked at the side of the house for a long time, then walked up to it slowly, tape still in his hand. He started measuring from the outside edge, right where the corner of the siding began, and walked the tape along the wall to the back. He stared at the number for a few seconds. I couldn't read it from where I was, but he looked puzzled. Then he walked back and did it again. His buddy walked over too, and they did the same thing together, comparing the measurement on one tape, then checking it again with a different one. Then they brought out a laser measure from the truck, one of those more expensive digital ones. They used that, aimed it down the same line, and stared at the reading. I could tell something was off. Eventually, Dad looked at me and told me to hold the dumb end of the tape while he did it again, just to be sure. I put it on the outside edge of the wall, and he walked all the way down to the far corner and looked at the number. 9.4 meters. He did it twice. Same reading. We went back inside to check again. Same process. Hold the tape to one corner of the wall, stretch it all the way across to the far end, and call out the number. 10 meters. I was standing right there. I saw it myself. I remember feeling this weird cold itch under my skin when I realized what that meant. The inside wall was longer than the outside wall. It didn't make any sense. The wall was flat, straight, with no odd angles or curves, nothing jutting in or out. The exterior wall lined up perfectly with the interior studs and frame. It was all one wall. There was no room or closet hiding in between. But there was a 60-centimeter difference between the inside and the outside. Almost 2 feet. They didn't say anything for a while. Just stood there, arms crossed, staring at the wall. Then they started looking around, checking for signs of double walls, hidden cavities, anything that could explain the discrepancy. But there was nothing. Every stud, every joist was accounted for. The window placements matched. The wiring routes made sense. It was a clean wall, straight and empty. I helped remove a section of the drywall that had already been hung temporarily. They cut it out to get a better look. Behind it was nothing unusual. Studs, insulation, electrical cables stapled along the wood. We even drilled through one of the studs just to make sure there wasn't another wall behind it. Nothing. The tape inside still read 10 meters. After a while, they stopped talking about it. They didn't laugh or shrug it off. They just got quiet and went back to work like it was easier to pretend they hadn't noticed. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few hours, I kept walking out and checking for myself. 9.4 meters outside, 10 inside, always the same. I tried to figure out how that could even happen. A measurement error seemed impossible. We were using 3 different tools. Maybe a mistake during construction, but this wasn't a new build. The house was at least 50 years old. If someone had built a false wall, it would have been obvious. The siding would look off, or the roof line wouldn't match. But everything did match. The strange part was that only that wall had the problem. Every other room measured the way it should. I checked. The kitchen was fine. The bathroom, the bedrooms, even the hallways, all the inside and outside measurements lined up. Only that one wall in the main room was longer inside than outside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that wall, about how space doesn't just appear out of nowhere, about how a house can't be bigger on the inside unless something is seriously wrong. It started eating at me. like a loose thread you can't stop picking at. The next day, while my dad was fixing up trim boards in another room, I drove back out there by myself. I didn't tell him. I brought my own measuring tape and a flashlight, and I walked around the house again. I checked every corner, every wall. Still 9.4 meters outside. I went back inside and measured again. 10 meters. This time I walked along the wall slowly, pressing my hand against it, looking for any irregularities. I tapped it, ran my fingers along the base, even knocked on the studs through the drywall. Everything felt solid. But halfway down the wall, right at about the 6-meter mark, I noticed something, a soft spot in the floor. It wasn't huge, just a slight give when I put my weight on it, like a loose subfloor board. But it was odd because I'd walked that stretch several times the day before and didn't remember it feeling like that. I got down on my knees and pressed again. The board dipped slightly. I took out my pocket knife and pried along the seam of the board until the edge lifted a little. Then I pulled up the panel. Underneath was a narrow void, a thin crawl space maybe, but it didn't look like it had ever been accessed. No insulation, no wiring, just open space. I dropped the flashlight in and saw smooth wood panels underneath. It looked finished, like a hidden floor or platform. The void wasn't deep, maybe 30 centimeters, but it was wide and clean. No dust, no cobwebs, no debris. It didn't make sense. The crawl space under the rest of the house was packed dirt and stone. I'd seen it the day before when they were inspecting the foundation. I lifted the next board. Same thing. Smooth, clean wood underneath. Then I hit something else, a narrow metal latch tucked beneath one of the seams. It was old, rusted, but still solid. I worked it loose and pulled. A hinged panel swung open, revealing a square opening just large enough to slide through. My heart started pounding. I didn't want to go in. Everything about it felt wrong. But I had to know. I dropped down into the space. It was silent and dry, with smooth wood panels on all sides. The walls were finished, like it was meant to be a room. But there were no doors, no windows, no vents. It was just an empty chamber about 60 centimeters wide and maybe 10 meters long. It ran parallel with the wall above. That's when it hit me. This was the missing 60 centimeters. A hidden chamber built along the wall, sealed beneath the floor, perfectly aligned with the inside measurements, but invisible from the outside. I ran my hand along the walls. There were no seams, no way in or out except the hatch I had opened. The air inside was still and cold. The wood was smooth, pale, and unmarked. It felt too perfect, too deliberate, like it had been built to be invisible. I stayed in there for maybe 2 minutes before the silence got to me. It wasn't just quiet, it was too quiet. Like sound itself was dead in there. I climbed out, sealed the hatch, and replaced the boards. My hands were shaking. That night, I told my dad what I found. He didn't say anything, just stared at me for a long time, then looked away. A few days later, he stopped working on that house. Told his buddy he couldn't help anymore. He never said why. Weeks passed. The house got sold again. The guy flipped it, made some money, and moved on. But I kept thinking about that room, about how it was built to be hidden, about how it didn't belong. I never went back. I still think about it sometimes. Not because I'm afraid of ghosts or anything like that. I don't believe in that stuff. But because someone built that space for a reason. Someone went to a lot of effort to make sure it didn't show up in measurements or blueprints. It happened just a week ago. I remember it so clearly because the image of him, that man, is still stuck in my head like a stain I can't scrub out. I keep going over in my mind what I saw, what I felt, what I could have done differently. I hadn't told anyone until now. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't find the words to describe just how wrong it felt. I've been home alone for 6 days at that point. My roommate was out of town visiting his family, and I was stuck here with exams coming up and no motivation to study. I had the apartment to myself, and I did what any lazy student does when left alone. I ignored the mess, skipped laundry, and lived mostly off of stale cereal and black coffee. By the 6th night, I'd finally run out of anything edible. Even the old pack of instant noodles I kept in the back of the cabinet had disappeared. I didn't feel like cooking even if I had anything. I was tired, cold, and frustrated. I just wanted something hot, greasy, and fast. So I decided to drive to the McDonald's near the city center. It was just after 2 a.m. when I pulled out of the underground garage. I remember the digital clock on the dashboard flipping over as I turned onto the main road. The streets were nearly empty, only a few parked cars and blinking traffic lights breaking up the stillness. The city always had this eerie calm in the early hours. It wasn't new to me, and I usually didn't mind it. The McDonald's I was heading to had a drive-thru that was open 24 hours, tucked into this massive commercial zone. The whole area was like a shopping complex that sprawled across several blocks. Stores, entertainment venues, a cinema, bowling alley, indoor karting, places meant for weekend traffic. Normally, the place was buzzing with people even at night, especially on weekends. But this was a Tuesday night, and everything was dead silent. The most unsettling part was that the streetlights were off. I'd driven through this area countless times before, and it was always lit up. Floodlights on the storefronts, warm glows spilling out from bars and clubs, signs blinking with neon colors. But that night, everything was dark, like someone had unplugged the entire grid. It wasn't a full blackout, just the kind of empty, partial darkness that you feel in your stomach. Even the McDonald's sign was dimmer than usual, like it was running on backup power. The few scattered cars were parked tight against the curbs, empty and cold. There were no sounds, no music, no laughter, no traffic. Just the hum of my engine and the faint thump of tires rolling on the asphalt. I kept driving through the narrow street that ran through the middle of the complex. The road was lined with glass storefronts and gated shop entrances. Most of them had metal shutters down, with only a few neon closed signs still blinking in the windows. My headlights were on low beam at first, and I was moving slowly, around 20 kilometers an hour. I wasn't in a rush. I was just trying to soak in the silence. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a dark shape ahead in the road. I thought it was a bag or maybe a shopping cart that someone had left behind. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. He was standing right in the middle of the street, not moving, just standing there like he'd been dropped from the sky. I slowed the car even more and flicked the high beams on. The light caught him squarely, and that's when my stomach dropped. He was wearing dark clothing, black track pants, a dark jacket, and what looked like a white hoodie or sweater underneath. But what caught my eye wasn't just the outfit. It was the blood. His face was pale, gaunt, almost gray in the headlights. Blood was smeared around his mouth, dripping down onto the ground in front of him. His clothes were wet with it. There was a dark, soaked blot across his lower torso, right where his hand was pressed tightly against his body. It looked like a stab wound. His posture was slouched, shoulders hunched forward, head hanging low. He was moving slowly, one dragging foot at a time, straight toward my car. It wasn't a walk. It was more like a shuffle, like he was half conscious, barely holding himself up. I froze. My first instinct was to help. I reached for my phone and kept my foot on the clutch. I remember the car locks itself a few seconds after driving off, so at least I had that. I lowered the driver's side window, just a crack. Maybe 3 or 4 centimeters, just enough to talk, but not enough for anyone to reach inside. He kept coming closer. The whole time, I kept watching his face. There was something about it, something hollow. His eyes were wide open, but unfocused, not looking at the car or the road. Just open and staring, like he wasn't fully there. His lips were slightly parted, and blood kept dribbling down onto his jacket. His other hand, the one not pressed to his stomach, hung limply at his side. There were small cuts and smears of blood along his fingers. When he reached the car, he leaned against the driver's side door. His hand smacked against the window, leaving a big red print that slid slightly as he shifted his weight. His breath fogged up the glass. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My mouth was dry, my palms were sweating, and I couldn't even get a word out. My brain felt scrambled. He didn't look at me through the window. He just kept staring ahead like I wasn't even there. Then he spoke. Not loud, just a few rough words, like he was reciting a command. I couldn't understand everything, but it was something about a place, a location, a district far from here, a rough part of town. I couldn't process it at first. I just sat there, unsure if I was supposed to respond or if this was some kind of trap. He repeated himself, louder and more aggressive this time. I still couldn't understand the whole sentence, but the tone was enough to make the decision for me. My foot came off the clutch, and I took off. The car jolted forward, tires squealing slightly as I sped past him. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the McDonald's lot, about 100 meters down the road. I parked under one of the dim yellow floodlights near the drive-through lane. I was shaking. My hands were gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles had gone white. I turned the engine off but kept the keys in. My first thought was to call the police, but something in me hesitated. Where I live, calling the police is often more trouble than it's worth. Unless you have something concrete, proof, a crime, an emergency, they tend to treat you like a nuisance. And doing it anonymously is even more useless. I sat there in the car for a minute, breathing heavily, trying to calm down. Then I looked at the side window. The blood was still there, thick and red, smeared across the glass like a warning. I couldn't leave it. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a pack of wet wipes. They weren't much, but they were all I had. I got out of the car and started wiping the window. The blood had already started drying at the edges. It didn't come off easily. I had to press hard, scrubbing in slow circles while my eyes kept darting back to the road behind me. There were also drops of blood on the door handle and a few splashes along the side panel. It was surreal. It didn't feel like it had happened just minutes ago. It felt like a dream or a scene from a movie I had watched too many times. But it was real. The smell of the blood on the wipes proved it. The red on my hands proved it. When I was done cleaning as best I could, I tossed the bloody wipes into a plastic bag and threw them into the garbage bin near the drive-thru. I got back into the car and moved into the queue. There were only 2 cars ahead of me. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see him there again, dragging himself across the lot. But there was no one. Then I saw movement. Off to the right, near the edge of the parking lot, there was a bus stop. It was about 50 meters away, under a flickering street lamp. And there he was. Same slouch posture, same dark clothes, same slow, dragging steps. He had made his way across the commercial complex and ended up at the bus stop. I don't know how. I hadn't seen him pass by, but there he was, standing under the weak light, blood still dripping from his hand. He leaned against the bus shelter, shoulders rising and falling like he was out of breath. I couldn't take my eyes off him. For 5 long minutes, I just stared, barely blinking, barely breathing. Then a cab pulled up. A regular yellow cab. Nothing unusual. It slowed down, stopped in front of the shelter, and the man got in. Just like that. Like he was an ordinary passenger going home after a night out. The cab drove off. I sat there stunned, waiting for some kind of explanation to materialize. But there was none. I got my food. I drove home. I parked the car underground again, and I didn't sleep until sunrise. For the next few days, I kept thinking about it. I kept checking the local news, scanning headlines for reports of stabbings, assaults, or suspicious activity in the commercial zone. Nothing came up. No mentions of a bleeding man, no stories about someone matching his description. It was like it had never happened. The blood on the car was gone, but I still saw it every time I looked at the window. I kept replaying the moment he leaned on the door, the way he looked right through me, the sound of his hand smacking the glass. I didn't tell anyone, not until now, because deep down, I knew what had happened. I just didn't want to admit it. That man had been in serious trouble. He had been bleeding, injured, maybe dying. And he came to me, not for help, but to demand I take him somewhere. I don't know why. Maybe he was running from something. Maybe he was part of something. Maybe he had done something. I was a little late to the whole high school party scene. Junior year had already chewed up half the calendar before I even considered hosting something like that. I'd always been the quiet one, straight edge, a little reserved, not because I was scared of people or anything, just because I never really felt like I fit into any of the mess. But my friend David was graduating early, some fast-track thing he'd worked for, and we all figured we needed to do something for him. He wasn't the loudest guy either, but people liked him. He was always calm, friendly in this easy, dependable way that made people feel like they could be themselves around him. So when someone floated the idea of throwing a party, it just kind of fell into my lap. My mom was weirdly chill about it. She had this laid-back, almost too permissive attitude toward things. I think she figured if something was going to happen, better it happen under her roof where she could keep an eye on it. She was deep into New Age stuff, crystals, incense, meditations, moon phases, the whole bit. I grew up around that. Never bought into it myself. But I learned to live with the smell of sage, smoke in my clothes, and the low hum of wind chimes coming through the windows, even when the air was still. When I asked her if we could have the party, she said sure right away. She even said we could keep the drinks in the garage fridge. That night was sticky with summer heat, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like it was carrying weight. I cleaned the house during the day and even mowed the backyard. My mom helped, oddly enthusiastic about the idea of a party. She said something about the house needing a shift in energy and that a celebration was the perfect way to move stagnant air. She even saged the corners of the living room, murmuring softly under her breath. And when I asked her what she was doing, she just smiled and said it was just something to make sure everyone there had good intentions. She was always doing stuff like that. People started showing up around 8. Some friend from school, some people I barely knew but had seen in hallways. It was weird seeing my house fill up like that. I kept expecting it to feel out of control, but for the most part it didn't. The music was loud, but not obnoxious. People drank, but no one was sloppy. We kept the windows open to let some air move through, and people wandered in and out from the backyard. My girlfriend had never been over before. We'd been dating for maybe 2 months at that point, and I was nervous about how the night would go with her there. She arrived around 9, and we stuck together most of the time, moving through groups and making awkward small talk. But eventually we got tired of the noise and all the people, and we ended up sneaking off to my room. I shut the door, locked it without really thinking, and we just lay on my bed, talking and half listening to the thump of bass and laughter bleeding in from downstairs. It was the first time I'd had her there, the first time I'd felt this private sense of ownership over my own space, like I could shut the rest of the world out. I remember thinking about how the bed still smelled faintly like detergent, and the air was cooler in my room than the rest of the house, probably because I'd left the fan on all day. It was comfortable in a way that felt separate from the noise outside that door. Somewhere deep in the night, had to be past midnight, we both fell asleep. I woke up to pounding on my door. It was violent, fast, frantic. The kind of banging that doesn't start slow, but instead explodes from the silence with so much panic it hits you in the chest. I sat up fast, heart already racing, and looked at the door like I expected it to break off the hinges. Then I heard footsteps moving down the hall, heavy and unsteady. Then more banging. It was 2 of my friends, Aaron and Casey. I recognized their voices instantly. Their yells were muffled by the door, but the tone was enough. Something was wrong. They weren't just messing around or drunk. There was real fear in the way they pounded, in the way they kept repeating my name again and again. I jumped out of bed, threw on my shirt, and ran to the door. I unlocked it and yanked it open. Aaron pushed through first, looking pale and out of breath. Casey was right behind him. They slammed the door shut and leaned against it like something was trying to get in. I didn't understand what was happening. I just remember Aaron whispering something over and over, almost to himself. Casey sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, shaking. I stood there, heart hammering, not knowing what to do. Eventually, they calmed down enough to explain. One of the other kids, Jake, had started acting weird. At first, they said he just sat by himself out in the backyard, staring at the tree line behind the fence. Then he started walking around, muttering, following people too closely. People thought he was drunk at first, but something about him wasn't normal. It wasn't slurred words or clumsy movements. He was quiet, way too quiet, eyes wide, didn't blink much, just stared. Then he grabbed a kitchen knife. No one saw where he got it. He just appeared with it in the living room, holding it low, walking slowly from person to person. Not fast, not wild. Just moving in this slow, deliberate way like he was hunting without any sound. Panic started. People ran out the front door, out into the backyard. He didn't chase anyone, just kept walking. That was when Aaron and Casey ran upstairs. They said they thought he was following them, that he'd seen them run up, and they thought they heard him on the stairs behind them. But he never made it to my room. They were terrified. Aaron said Jake had looked directly at my door and just stopped. Said he stood there, still holding the knife, and then just turned around and walked back down the stairs. The three of us stayed locked in my room for what felt like forever. We turned off the lights and sat there in the dark, listening. Occasionally, we heard something below, like someone moving furniture, something falling, a distant thud, but no screams, no voices. I remember thinking the worst part wasn't the possibility of violence. It was the waiting, the not knowing. Eventually, after maybe 40 minutes of silence, I opened the door and crept into the hallway. The upstairs was dark and empty. I moved toward the stairs and paused at the top, listening. Nothing. I went back, grabbed a baseball bat from my closet, and slowly made my way downstairs. The house was trashed. One of the kitchen chairs was overturned. A few picture frames had fallen off the wall. The back door was wide open, screen door swinging slightly in the warm breeze. But Jake was gone. We found out the next day that someone had called the cops after seeing him walking down the street with the knife still in his hand. They picked him up 2 blocks away. He didn't resist or say anything, just dropped the knife and sat down on the curb. Later on, we learned Jake told the cops he'd been possessed, that something had taken over him, that he remembered everything but couldn't control anything. He said something had entered him earlier that night while he was staring at the trees. Said he tried to fight it but couldn't. The weirdest thing he told them was that he physically couldn't walk through my doorway, that every time he tried to step toward it, his legs wouldn't move, like he was hitting a wall he couldn't see. Here's the part that really stuck with me. When we first moved into that house, my mom told me she did some kind of ritual in my room and hers. Said it was to protect the rooms from bad energy. I remember her lighting candles and putting small stones above the door frames. She used to say things like, "It's not about whether it's real, it's about what kind of intention you want to set." I always roll my eyes. It was harmless to me, something quirky and weird and typical of her. I never gave it any serious thought, but Jake had no idea about any of that. He'd never been inside my house before, never even stood at my bedroom door before that night. So when he told the cops he couldn't get past my doorway, even if he tried, it unsettled me in a way I couldn't shake. After everything, I tried to go back to normal, cleaned up the house, tried to move on. The party ended early, obviously. People went home. No one got hurt, and Jake's parents pulled him from school not long after. I never saw him again. I still don't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that. I think people break sometimes. I think pressure builds in someone, and if they don't have a way to release it, it explodes in whatever direction it can. I think Jake was carrying something none of us saw, and that night it finally spilled over. I think trauma can make people behave in ways that don't seem real. But I also think about how quiet he went when he reached my door, how he stared at it like it was a threat. And I think about the small pieces of amethyst my mom taped above the frame years before I ever invited anyone into that room. I still find them there sometimes when I look closely. I don't believe in magic, but I also don't try to explain what happened that night anymore. I keep the stones where they are. I leave the door frame untouched, because maybe it wasn't anything. Maybe Jake hit his limit that night, and my room just happened to be where he stopped. But maybe there's something about the way we protect ourselves, intentionally or not, that makes a difference when things fall apart. I stayed straight edge. Still am. I still live clean, still don't party. But I keep a baseball bat by my bed now. And when I move into new places, I check the door frames without really knowing why. I guess once you watch fear step toward you and stop at the threshold, it changes how you see the space you sleep in. That night left a crack in the way I thought the world worked. Not big enough to fall through, just enough to see that sometimes, whether you believe in it or not, something keeps danger on the other side of the door. And sometimes that's an It was the spring of 1974 when my wife and I decided to raise our first litter of Springer Spaniels. We live in a small white farmhouse outside town, tucked deep in the Pennsylvania countryside. It was the kind of house with peeling shutters, a gravel driveway that stayed muddy through half the year, and a wide front porch with a crooked swing that always creaked when a wind picked up. Our backyard sloped into a thicket of woods that grew thick with underbrush, and sometimes at night, we'd hear raccoons or stray dogs rooting around out there, but we never thought much of it. We had both grown up around animals. My wife came from a dairy farm in Lancaster County, and I'd grown up on the edge of coal country where everyone had a hound or two, and sometimes more if they hunted. We weren't strangers to hard work, and we certainly weren't strangers to dogs, but raising a litter from birth was something new. We bought our first breeding pair, Maggie and Gunner, from a reputable breeder who lived about 30 miles away. Maggie had that classic liver-and-white coat and long floppy ears, while Gunner had a deep chest and a quieter temperament. We kept them in a large pen out back where they had room to run and dig, and we built them a double-walled insulated doghouse for the winter. By late February, Maggie started showing signs of pregnancy. She got heavy and tired and began sleeping on her side more. Her appetite increased, and her temperament softened, like she was already settling into motherhood before the pups arrived. We read everything we could get our hands on about whelping and caring for newborn pups, mostly old paperback books and a few pamphlets from the vet's office. The vet, a man in his 60s with a heavy gut and a smoker's voice, told us to call when the time came, but that we shouldn't worry too much. Dogs have been doing this a lot longer than we've been watching, he said. We trusted him. He delivered calves, stitched up wounded strays, and once even set the broken leg of a mule that belonged to my cousin. The night Maggie went into labor, it was cold. A wind had picked up that howled against the window panes, and the power flickered once or twice. We'd set up a whelping box in the corner of our living room, lined it with old towels and blankets, and we sat beside her as the hours passed. It started around 8 in the evening. By 2 in the morning, she had delivered 8 puppies, one after the other, each slick and blind and wriggling. They were beautiful, mostly liver and white like Maggie, with a few darker patches that looked more like Gunner. We watched them nurse, their little mouths opening and closing, pawing blindly at their mother's belly. We were proud, like parents, even though we knew we'd have to sell them in 8 or 10 weeks. We planned to sell them as AKC certified pups. Back then, to meet the breed standard, that meant docking their tails. It was something I hadn't thought much about before, but now that it was in front of us, it made me uncomfortable. I didn't like the idea of hurting something so small and helpless, but the vet told us it had to be done within 2 or 3 days of birth. Said the nerves weren't developed, that they'd barely feel it. He said we could do it ourselves with clean scissors and alcohol, that it wouldn't bleed much, and that the snip would seal itself. So the next day, after laying down newspaper on the kitchen table and heating up water for sanitation, we began. I held the first puppy in my hands. It weighed barely anything, just a few ounces of life squirming in my palm. My wife took the scissors, hesitated, then did it. The sound the puppy made, I still hear it sometimes when I can't sleep. It was like a scream, but sharper, short, like it had just been crushed. It yipped and writhed, its back legs kicking against my hand. The blood came fast, not a trickle, but a sudden spread that soaked into the towel beneath it. It didn't stop immediately either. The stump leaked for longer than we expected. We did our best to clean it and pressed it with gauze, but the puppy kept squirming, kept making those little wounded noises. It felt wrong. It looked wrong. I said I couldn't do it. But my wife, pale and shaking, said she had done it, and so I should too. She was right, in a way. So I took the second pup. My hands were shaking. I lined up the scissors and tried not to think. The sound of that snip, it stayed with me. The pup reacted just like the first. Sudden, violent pain. Blood again, more than we'd been told to expect. I wrapped the stump as best I could, held the pup until it stopped whining, and then returned it to Maggie's side. I didn't feel proud. I felt like I'd done something wrong, even if it was what we were supposed to do. We stopped after those 2. I said I wouldn't do any more. My wife agreed. Maybe we were soft, but it just felt cruel. The other 6 pups kept their tails, and we made note to tell any potential buyers that they were full-blooded but not docked. If someone didn't want them because of that, then so be it. A few days passed. The pups began to grow quickly, as they do. They started crawling over each other, mewling, sniffing the air with their tiny noses. Their eyes hadn't opened yet, but they were stronger, more curious. Maggie kept them clean, licking them off and nudging them back into place with her nose when they wandered too far. She was a good mother. Then, on the 4th day, we noticed something strange. We were changing the blankets in the box and doing a quick check of each pup like we always did, counting them, cleaning their bedding, checking for signs of illness. That's when we saw it. There were 3 puppies without tails. I picked them up one by one. The first 2 were exactly as we remembered, scabs forming over where we had docked them, little nubs healing. But the third had no tail at all, and not even a scab. There was no wound, no dry blood, nothing. It was like it had been born that way. Clean skin, slightly wrinkled where the tail should have been, but fully healed. We looked at each other. I asked my wife if she'd done another one and not told me. She looked confused, said no. I believed her. I hadn't left her side in days, and there hadn't been anyone else in the house. No visitors, no vet, no neighbors. We had no children. It was just us and the dogs. The scissors were where we left them, in the kitchen drawer. Clean, unused. We checked the trash, thinking maybe we missed something, bloodied paper towels or gauze that would explain a third tail being cut. Nothing. We looked around the whelping box. No signs of bleeding. No tail lying in the straw. No clue at all. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the tail had fallen off, somehow, but that didn't make sense. There would have been blood and pain, and we would have heard it. I kept thinking maybe we made a mistake. Maybe we docked 3 and just forgot. But I knew we hadn't. We were too shaken after the first 2 to continue. We'd said out loud. We'd agreed. Still, we let it go. What else could we do? It was just a tail. Maybe it had been a birth defect we hadn't noticed. Maybe one of the pups had been born without a tail, and we'd mistaken it during the chaos of the birth. We told ourselves that. We told ourselves it didn't matter. But something about it stayed with me. Weeks passed. The pups grew fast, began to open their eyes, and crawl out of the box. They started chewing on things, biting at each other's ears and tails. They were playful, healthy, noisy. By the 7th week, they were full of energy, bouncing across the kitchen floor like little whirlwinds. We had them eating softened kibble and learning to go outside to do their business. It was exhausting and wonderful. But the pup without the tail, the third one, was different. It wasn't sick. It wasn't smaller or weaker. But it was different. It didn't play as much. It sat more than it moved, watching the others. It wouldn't follow my hand or bark when I clapped like the rest did. It would just sit there, eyes wide, almost like it was thinking. Not scared, not nervous, just watching. I started calling it the quiet one. I didn't want to admit it unnerved me, but it did. I tried to handle it more, pet it longer, spend extra time with it. I wanted to break it out of whatever mood it seemed trapped in. But no matter what I did, it just sat there with those wide, still eyes. And it never wagged its stump. The other 2 tail-docked pups, they still wagged. But not that one. When it came time to sell the litter, I advertised them in the paper and at the local feed store. Calls came in fast. Springer Spaniels were popular, and word got around that we had a healthy batch. One by one, they went. Little boxes and leashes and families showing up with kids and promises to send us pictures. I felt proud. We did a good job. Maggie watched each one go with her ears drooped and her tail wagging like she knew what was happening. But I couldn't bring myself to sell the quiet one. I don't know why. I told my wife we should keep 1 pup from the first litter anyway, that we could train it, maybe breed it later. But I knew it wasn't about that. I just didn't want to give it to someone else. It felt wrong. I felt like it was ours in a different way, like it knew something, like we owed it something. We named it Scout. Scout stayed with us for the next 12 years. He lived a long, healthy life. Never sick a day, never hurt. But he was always quiet. Never barked, never chased. He wasn't afraid. He just watched. Watched me, watched my wife, watched the woods out back. He'd sit on the porch, ears perked, eyes following something I couldn't see. And we never figured out what happened to his tail. I've raised many litters since then. Dozens, maybe more. I never docked another tail. Buyers sometimes complained, but I didn't care. I told them they could do it themselves. It was a gray Saturday in late spring, the kind of day where the clouds hang low like wet cotton and the air smells faintly of cut grass and damp earth. My father, who had recently been elected to the borough council in our rural municipality, decided to take a drive out to follow up on a complaint. He was that kind of guy. He didn't wait around for someone else to take care of a problem. He believed in showing up, in seeing things for himself. That morning, over breakfast, He told me about the call he got from one of the residents on the outskirts of the borough. It wasn't the first complaint about that particular spot, not by a long shot. The police had been there several times. Neighbors said the place was a mess, and worse, that something bad was happening inside one of the trailers. He didn't want to go alone. Maybe he knew it was going to be bad, or maybe he just thought it wouldn't hurt to have someone ride along. I was a teenager at the time, old enough to know better, but still young enough to feel like I had no say in the matter. So I got into our old Dodge Aries, the one that rattled when it idled and smelled like mildew every time it rained. The drive took about 20 minutes. Our borough isn't a town in the proper sense. It's a mix of suburban sprawl and country backroads. No real center, no sidewalks, just patches of homes tucked between woods and fields. The area we were heading to was one of those half-forgotten places where the pavement turns to gravel and the gravel gives way to dirt. It was barely a road, more like a widened path beaten down by years of pickup trucks and ATVs. We passed a few modest homes, most with rusted swing sets or old lawnmowers sitting in the front yard. Some of the houses were well kept. American flags, bird feeders, neatly trimmed hedges, but the further we went, the more run-down everything looked. Lawns turned into patches of scrub grass. Fences leaned or had fallen altogether. Old cars sat up on cinder blocks like broken animals. Eventually, we pulled up in front of two trailers sitting side by side on a dirt lot. They were maybe 50 feet apart, each with its own patch of gravel yard. One was in slightly better shape than the other. It had a fresh coat of beige paint, plastic flower boxes under the windows, a garden gnome near the stairs. The other one, the one on the left, looked like it hadn't seen a good day in 20 years. Its aluminum siding was bent and streaked with rust. The windows were either covered with old sheets or left bare. Garbage was piled around the porch. Broken furniture, plastic bags, empty paint cans, beer bottles, and what looked like a rusted bike frame sticking out of the mess. We got out of the car and stood there for a second, listening. The place was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It felt like the stillness you get just before something bad happens. No birds, no dogs barking, no kids playing. Just the breeze, the crunch of gravel under our feet, and the faint metallic ticking of our car's engine cooling down. My father walked over toward the cleaner-looking trailer, and a couple came out to greet him. They looked to be in their late 40s or early 50s, dressed simply, the man in jeans and a flannel shirt, the woman in a sweatshirt that had seen better days. They seemed hesitant at first, wary maybe, until my father introduced himself and explained why he was there. Then they started to talk. I stayed back a little, not really wanting to be part of the conversation. I scanned the property, half curious, half on edge. The couple kept looking over at the other trailer as they spoke. My dad nodded along, arms crossed. He asked a few questions, but mostly he listened. I caught bits and pieces of what they were saying. Words like screaming, knife, police, mother, and filthy. Their eyes kept drifting to the trailer next door. The woman rubbed her arm nervously. The man's jaw clenched every time he glanced that way. I felt something crawl up the back of my neck. Not a bug, just that feeling like your skin is warning you to be somewhere else. I drifted away from them, walking slowly toward the bad trailer, the one everyone was afraid of. I didn't plan to get too close. I just wanted to look. From a distance, it looked like a bomb had gone off inside a junkyard. The smell hit me before I even got to the edge of the porch. It wasn't just garbage. It was rot. Something deeper. A sickly sweet stench that clung to the air. I'd smelled dead animals before, roadkill, fish, but this was worse. It was old death, mixed with filth and grease and mildew. I had to breathe through my mouth. There was a fridge on the porch, not plugged in, just sitting there like someone had dumped it. It was stained with rust. On top of it, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a pile of sticks. Then I saw the curve, the smoothness, the off-white yellow of bone. A rib cage. Not human, I knew that much. Probably a dog's. Maybe the remains of a hunting animal. The spine was still attached, curling like a scorpion's tail. Flies buzzed around it. That's when I heard my dad's voice call for me to come back. He wasn't shouting, but there was an edge to his voice, something tight and clipped. I didn't argue. I turned and walked quickly back to the car. I didn't run, but I wanted to. I wanted to get away before whoever lived in that trailer came home and found me gawking at their porch like some nosy kid. Back at the car, the neighbors were finishing up their conversation with my dad. The man leaned in a little and said something low. My dad nodded once, tight-lipped, then thanked them and turned to me. We got in the car and started back down the gravel road. We didn't talk for a long time. The tires kicked up dust behind us, and I kept looking in the rearview mirror until the trailers disappeared behind the trees. When we finally got back to the house, my dad sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the Formica surface like he was doing math in his head. He told me not to mention anything to my mother. Not yet. He had to make a few calls first. Later that week, he went to a council meeting and brought it up. I heard him on the phone with someone from the county health department. He called the police chief. He wrote a report. It was all very official, very structured, like he was building a case out of paperwork and chain of command. A few days later, I heard from him that the police had gone back out there. They'd gotten a warrant, gone into the trailer. The woman, an old woman in her late 70s, had been found inside, naked, lying on a stained mattress with garbage piled knee-deep around her. She was covered in filth. Her skin was raw in places. She had maggots under her breasts, feeding off the sores. A dead dog had been left to rot in the living room, its ribs sticking out like the one I'd seen on the porch. No one knew how long it had been dead. The woman had been taken out of there in an ambulance and sent to a care facility. She didn't talk much, just mumbled. People said her sons, 2 men in their 30s or 40s, kept her there like an animal. The neighbors had heard her screaming for months, maybe years. Things like, "Leave me alone," or "Just give me back my underwear." No one had the guts to confront the sons. They were big men, thick in the shoulders, the kind of guys who work with their hands and keep a pistol on their belt like it's part of their uniform. People were afraid of them. The cops had been called more than once, but there was always some excuse, some rights issue, some reason they couldn't do anything permanent. After the old woman was taken out, the men disappeared for a while. No one saw them. Their truck was gone. People wondered if they'd skipped town or been arrested. They hadn't. A week later, they came back. Just like that. The trailer was still there, still full of filth. They didn't bother cleaning it up. They kept to themselves, but the smell, the mess, the atmosphere, it all lingered like a wound that wouldn't scab over. My dad kept pushing. He called in every favor he had. County services got involved. Zoning violations were written up. Animal control came by. The health department issued a notice of condemnation, but the process was slow, full of red tape and hearings and loopholes. Eventually, the trailer was declared uninhabitable. The old woman was placed in a long-term care facility and never went back. The sons tried to fight the notice, but they didn't have the money for a lawyer, and after enough pressure, they finally moved out. I don't know where they went. Some said they took off to another county. Others said they moved into another rundown place not far away. The trailer sat empty for a long time, sagging into the dirt, the windows boarded up. Nature started taking it back. Vines grew over the porch, weeds pushed up through the gravel. A couple years later, it was bulldozed. All that remained was a patch of barren land, a rectangle of dead earth where nothing grew. People still drove by, but no one stopped. I never went back there again. I didn't need to. I still remember the smell, the look of that ribcage, the way the neighbors' voices dropped when they talked about the screams. But mostly, I remember the silence, the way the world seemed to hold its breath around that place, like even the wind didn't want to get too close. That trip changed how I saw things. Before, I thought bad people lived in faraway places in cities or the news. But this was right there, just 20 minutes from my front door, in the same borough where I rode my bike and mowed lawns and went to school. Evil didn't look like a monster. It looked like a trailer with rust on the sides and garbage on the porch. And I understood, finally, what my dad meant when he said that showing up was the hardest part. It meant looking at things you didn't want to see. It meant standing in front of something ugly and not looking away.